What's up, guys? Welcome to Wizardium. We've got something special today. What if Harry and Hermione were declared the true heirs of the Peverell legacy? Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Chapter 1, The Waking Stone. The defense against the dark arts practical exam was supposed to be simple. Professor Remus Lupin, back for a second stint after the Ministry had quietly run out of better options, had set up the third-floor corridor with a series of spell deflection obstacles, a boggart in a cabinet at the far end, and strict instructions that students were to work through the course in pairs. The rubric was posted on the door. The grading criteria were clear. The whole thing was designed to take 40 minutes per pair and involve absolutely no surprises. Harry had been skeptical from the moment he'd read "no surprises" on the exam sheet. "Stop looking at it like it owes you money," Hermione said beside him, adjusting her grip on her wand as they waited their turn in the corridor. She was scanning the obstacle course with the focused, slightly predatory expression she wore when she was memorizing something: the exact angles of the deflection shields, the spacing between them, the way the enchanted training dummies moved in their pre-programmed patrol patterns. "I'm not," Harry said. "You're doing the thing with your jaw." "What thing?" "The clenching thing. You do it when you think something's about to go wrong." He made a conscious effort to unclench. "I just think Lupin's being too relaxed about the boggart placement. It's right at the end after we've already run the full course. If someone's genuinely rattled by the obstacles first, then the boggart gets a more vulnerable target." "I know, I noticed too." Hermione glanced sideways at him. "I already have a plan for it." "So do I." "Are they the same plan?" "Probably not." "Then we should compare." They had 30 seconds before Lupin waved them forward, and in those 30 seconds they did exactly that: a rapid, low-voiced exchange of tactical notes that had become second nature over 6 years of sharing every dangerous situation Hogwarts had thrown at them. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't dramatic. It was just the particular frequency they'd always operated on, the one that hummed between them so naturally that neither of them noticed it anymore, the way you stop noticing the sound of a river once you've lived beside it long enough. Lupin waved them in. The course itself was genuinely good. Harry gave it that. The deflection shields weren't static, they rotated on a timer, and you had to either wait for the gap or create one. The training dummies didn't just patrol, they responded to spellfire with counter-hexes, mid-level stuff, nothing that would actually hurt, but enough to throw off your rhythm if you weren't paying attention. There were 2 pressure plate traps on the floor that would trigger a disorientation jinx if stepped on, almost invisible unless you knew to look for the slight discoloration in the stone. Hermione spotted both and stepped around them without breaking stride. Harry took the left side of the course while Hermione handled the right, and they moved through it in the kind of synchronized quiet that comes not from rehearsal but from knowing exactly how another person thinks under pressure. He cancelled a shield rotation with a precisely aimed finite and held the gap open long enough for both of them to move through. She hit a dummy with a stupefy so clean and fast it barely had time to raise its counter-hex arm. They split naturally around an obstacle, converged on the other side, kept moving. Lupin, watching from the doorway with his clipboard, had stopped writing at some point and was just watching. The boggart cabinet was at the far end, against the north wall, a tall wooden thing that rattled very slightly in a way that suggested whatever was inside was having an extremely bad day. Harry felt his jaw tighten again. He consciously loosened it. "Together?" Hermione asked quietly. "Together." She opened the cabinet. What came out first was a shape, tall, robed, greenlit at its edges in the way that meant dark magic, the particular cold light signature of the killing curse, and for one fraction of a second it was Voldemort, or the impression of Voldemort, the fear construct that Harry's mind had assembled out of too many years and too many close calls. And then something happened that had nothing to do with the exam. The floor moved, not physically. Not in any way that left a scratch on the stone or made Lupin stumble in the doorway. But Harry felt it, a deep subterranean shift, like a tectonic plate adjusting, like something old and fundamental deciding that now was the time, and beside him he heard Hermione make a sharp sound, not quite pain, not quite surprise, something in between. The boggart froze. That wasn't supposed to happen. Boggarts didn't freeze. They responded, they shapeshifted, they fed on fear. They didn't just stop in the middle of a transformation and hang there in the air like a painting of a threat. The cold green light was still there, pulsing, but the shape had gone strange. It wasn't Voldemort anymore. It wasn't anything Harry had a name for. It looked like a door. "Harry," Hermione said, and her voice was very careful in the way it got when she was 2 seconds from either breakthrough or a crisis. "I see it," he said. The door opened. What happened next lasted approximately 3 seconds in real time, and approximately forever in any way that mattered. There was no corridor. There was no boggart, no exam, no Lupin in the doorway with his clipboard. There was a space that was somehow both indoors and outside at once, lit by a sky that was the particular grey-purple of a storm that has been waiting a very long time, and in that space stood 3 men who should not have existed, 3 men who were unmistakably brothers. Harry knew who they were the way you know things in dreams, not because anyone told you, but because knowing was baked into the experience itself. The eldest was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the particular relaxed confidence of a man who has never been told no and has fully internalized this fact. He looked at Harry with a measuring sort of curiosity, like a craftsman examining raw material. The middle one was watching Hermione. He looked younger than his brother, but the eyes were older, the eyes of someone who had spent too long looking at the space between things, the boundaries, the seams. There was something hungry there, and something sad, and something that had never quite resolved. The youngest stood slightly apart from the other two, and he smiled, not the broad smile of the eldest or the complicated half-smile of the middle, but something small and genuine and a little rueful. He looked at Harry and Hermione together, and whatever he saw there, it made him nod once slowly, as if confirming something he'd suspected. The eldest spoke first. His voice had the quality of stone in it, not cold but permanent. "You carry the cloak." It wasn't a question. Harry didn't answer it like one. "Yes, and you carry the weight of the stone," the middle brother said to Hermione. His tone was more complicated than his elders'. There was something almost like a warning in it. "You have always wanted to know things beyond the natural boundary of knowing. Be careful with that." Hermione's chin came up slightly. "I'm always careful." "No," he said, not unkindly. "You're always thorough. That's different." The youngest brother stepped forward. Up close he looked remarkably ordinary, the kind of face that wouldn't stand out in a crowd, which Harry suspected was precisely the point. His eyes, though, his eyes were very still. "The wand will not come to either of you," he said. "You should know that. What my eldest brother made is not a gift. It was never a gift." He paused. "But you don't need it. You never did." "Then what exactly?" Hermione said, in the tone she used when she wanted information and was trying to be patient about wanting it. "Are you telling us?" The three brothers looked at each other. Something passed between them, old, layered, the particular communication of people who have had the same argument for centuries. "We are telling you," the eldest said, "that you are recognized." "As what?" Harry asked. "As ours," the youngest said simply. "The line did not die, it moved. It always moves. Bloodlines are water, they find the path, and it moved to the two of you. Separately it would have meant very little, a nudge, a slight advantage, an instinct that fires a half-second faster than it should." He looked at them both. "Together it is something else entirely." "Free gifts were never meant to function independently," the middle brother said. His voice had shifted, less warning, more something like regret. "Antioch made his weapon. I made my mistake. Ignotus," he glanced at the youngest, and something in the glance was centuries of complicated brotherhood. "Ignotus made the only wise thing any of us made. And wisdom, as it turns out, is the one gift that compounds." "What does being recognized actually mean?" Harry asked. He wasn't being rude. Being specific, there was a difference. "In practical terms, what changes?" The eldest smiled. It was a very broad, very satisfied smile, and it explained a lot about why the wand had been created in the first place. "Everything," he said. The youngest put a hand on Harry's shoulder, brief, weightless, the touch of something that wasn't quite physical, and then the same on Hermione's, and the purple-grey sky folded inward like a piece of parchment being tucked away. Harry blinked. The corridor. The boggart cabinet now closed, the boggart apparently gone, or perhaps simply confused out of existence. Lupin stood in the doorway holding his clipboard so hard his knuckles had gone white. "What?" Lupin said in a very measured voice. "Was that?" Harry and Hermione looked at each other. A lot passed between them in that look. Not words exactly, there hadn't been words yet for most of what had just happened, but an assessment, the kind they'd always been good at. "Are you all right?" "Yes." "Are you changed?" "Yes." "Do we understand what this means yet?" "No." "Are we going to figure it out?" "Obviously. We're not entirely sure," Hermione said to Lupin, which was both truthful and, Harry noted, admirably economical. Lupin stepped fully into the corridor. He was not panicking. He was too experienced a wizard and too careful a man to panic, but the clipboard was definitely suffering. The boggart froze. I have never, in 23 years of dealing with boggarts, seen one freeze. And then there was a pressure, some kind of... "You felt it too?" Harry asked. Harry, everyone within 50 meters of this corridor felt it. Lupin's eyes were moving over both of them with the focused attention of someone cataloguing changes. "Your magic felt..." He stopped, started again. "Do you feel any different?" Harry considered this honestly. He felt the way you feel after your eyes have adjusted to a very dark room, not that the darkness was gone, but that you could finally see properly within it. Everything was the same, and everything was legible in a way it hadn't been before. He could feel his wand in his pocket the way you feel a key that fits perfectly, not just an object but an extension of something, a precision instrument rather than a blunt one. "Yes," he said. Beside him, Hermione had gone very quiet. She was doing something Harry recognized, running internal calculations, cross-referencing what she'd experienced against what she knew, which was a process she usually ran out loud but was currently keeping private, which told him the results were either exciting or alarming and possibly both. "There's a library," she said suddenly. Lupin looked at her. "I'm sorry. In my head, that sounds mad. I know it sounds mad." She pressed two fingers to her temple, not in pain but in concentration. "It's not like having someone else in there. It's more like, you know, when you learn something so thoroughly that you stop having to think about it consciously. Like the way you don't recite the grammar rules when you speak, you just speak. It's like that. There's an enormous amount of knowledge that is simply available, in the way my own memories are available." "What kind of knowledge?" Lupin asked. "Old magic," she said, and her voice had gone slightly wondering. "Very old. Pre-ministry, pre-Hogwarts, pre-statute. Some of it I don't have the framework for yet. It's there, but I can't quite access the context. But some of it is perfectly clear, and the bits that are clear are..." She trailed off. "Hermione," Harry said, "we need to move very carefully," she finished. Why? She looked at him. Because some of what I can now do could rearrange the world. The corridor was very quiet. Outside the window at the far end, a cloud passed over the October sun and the light shifted, and Lupin put his clipboard down on top of a deflection shield as if he'd forgotten he was holding it. Right, he said. I think we need to go and talk to Dumbledore. Dumbledore's office had seen a great many extraordinary things over the decades, and the headmaster himself had a carefully cultivated talent for responding to the extraordinary with the appearance of perfect calm. Harry had always found this slightly maddening, not because it wasn't impressive, but because the calm was so complete that it was impossible to tell whether Dumbledore was genuinely unruffled or was simply a man of extraordinary self-discipline, and the difference mattered. Today, for the first time, Harry could tell. He didn't know how some new perceptual layer, some Peverell-inherited sense that operated below conscious thought, but he walked into the headmaster's office and looked at Albus Dumbledore sitting behind his desk with his reading glasses on and his silver beard neatly arranged, and his expression one of benevolent, interested calm, and he knew with absolute certainty that the man was rattled. It was in the slight tension around his eyes. The way his hand was resting on the desk with the fingers just slightly more spread than usual, the unconscious posture of someone who wants their wand close without reaching for it. The Phoenix Fawkes on his perch behind the desk was watching Harry and Hermione with an attention that went beyond the bird's usual mild curiosity. Sit down, Dumbledore said pleasantly. Remus, thank you, I'll take it from here. Lupin, who had been hovering in the doorway with the expression of a man who would very much like to stay and have several questions answered, looked for a moment as though he might object. Then he caught something in Dumbledore's tone, not an instruction precisely, but the weight behind an instruction, and nodded and left. The door closed. Well, Dumbledore said, looking at them both over his glasses. Tell me what happened. Harry let Hermione lead. She was more precise and less likely to omit detail when reconstructing an event, and this seemed like a moment when precision mattered. She told it straight. The boggart freezing, the door, the three figures, what had been said. She didn't editorialize, she didn't speculate, she just reported. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which Harry noticed, because Dumbledore almost always found gentle, Socratic ways to steer a conversation while appearing to simply listen. When Hermione finished, the headmaster was quiet for a moment. The Peverells, he said. You know about this? Harry asked. I know about the Peverells, yes, I know considerably more than most. Dumbledore took off his glasses and set them on the desk. His eyes, the famous, infuriating, deeply blue eyes, were entirely serious. I did not know this was possible. A joint recognition of two heirs simultaneously is. He paused, and Harry saw it again, that fractional rattledness, a hairline crack in the calm. It is unprecedented to the best of my knowledge. What does it mean for your plans? Harry asked. The directness of it landed in the room with a small, crisp sound. Hermione glanced at him slightly, not alarmed, but noting it. Dumbledore blinked just once. I beg your pardon. You have a plan, Harry said, not accusatory, just flat. You've had one for a while. It involves me in ways you've been parceling out gradually, telling me what you think I need to know when you think I need to know it. He leaned forward slightly. I want to know what changes now, because some things need to change. The silence in the office was a thinking silence. Fawkes made a soft sound on his perch. One of the portraits on the wall, an old headmaster with a red robe and a complicated expression, shifted in his frame and pretended to be asleep. You are different, Dumbledore said quietly, not alarmed, measuring, not just in power, though that is considerable, I can feel it from here, but in, he searched for the word. Clarity, Hermione offered. Yes. Dumbledore looked at her with an expression Harry had never quite seen on him before, the look of a very intelligent person recalibrating, adjusting their model of the world. Miss Granger, what do you know that you didn't know this morning? How to permanently destroy a Horcrux, she said immediately. The room changed again. Fawkes's head came up sharply. The supposedly sleeping portrait's eyes opened. Dumbledore's hands, both of them flattened against the desk. Elaborate, he said, and his voice was very precise. The method you've been using or intending to use relies on magical objects, basilisk venom, fiendfire. Those work, but they're destructive and difficult to control and require specific conditions. What I know now is older than that. The Peverells understood soul magic in a way nobody has understood it since, because nobody after them had the same reason to. They encountered Voldemort's predecessors, dark wizards who fragmented their souls for power, and they developed a method of drawing the fragment out rather than burning the container. She was speaking quickly, the way she always did when knowledge was organizing itself into words, but there was nothing frantic about it. The container survives. The Horcrux doesn't, and it can be done silently with no additional materials in approximately 30 seconds per object. Harry watched Dumbledore's face. He saw the headmaster run the math, what this meant for the timeline, for the plan, for everything he'd been carefully, painfully scaffolding over the past year, and he saw the moment Dumbledore decided that the correct response was not to maintain his usual strategy of graduated disclosure. How many are there? Dumbledore asked. Your new understanding, how many Horcruxes? 7 intended, Harry said quietly. 6 remaining because I dealt with the diary in second year and the 7th isn't an object. The silence this time was different. You know, Dumbledore said, about me, that I'm one of them. Harry nodded once. I figured it out about 10 minutes ago in the corridor. Whatever the Peverells gave me, one of the things it gave me is the ability to sense the soul work. I can feel the fragment in me." He kept his voice entirely level because there wasn't any other way he wanted to say it. "And before you spend a lot of time working out how to tell me without breaking me, don't tell me how Hermione's method works on a living host." Hermione had gone very still beside him. "Harry," she said softly, "it's fine." "It's not, Hermione, I know." He looked at her and something in the look settled her, not silenced her, never that, but landed. "I know, and it's fine. Tell me it's solvable." She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. "Then it's solvable. The extraction method works on living hosts. It's more difficult. The soul fragment is anchored differently in a living person than in an object, but it's possible. We just need," she thought for a moment, 3 days to prepare properly, a specific ritual space, and someone who can hold the anchor point steady while I perform the extraction." "I can hold it," Harry said. "It'll hurt." Compared to what? She almost smiled. It was the small, sharp-edged smile she kept for moments of dark humor, the one that meant fair point. "Compared to most things," she conceded. Dumbledore had been watching this exchange with the expression of a man who has spent many years believing he is the smartest person in any given room and has just encountered meaningful counter-evidence. It wasn't wounded pride, Harry didn't think. It was more like the particular adjustment of a very good scientist when an experiment produces unexpected data. Surprise, genuine and uncomfortable, but also the beginning of something that might become respect. "I owe you both an apology," Dumbledore said. Harry raised an eyebrow. This genuinely he hadn't expected. "I have been managing you," Dumbledore said. He said it plainly, without deflection, and the plainness of it was more disarming than any elaborate explanation would have been. "With the best intentions, and with what I believe to be necessary caution. But I have been managing you, Harry, as a variable in a plan rather than as a partner in one. That was a mistake, and it was, I think, unkind." He paused. "And you, Miss Granger, I have underutilized badly. I have always known what you were capable of. I chose a slower path." "Why?" Hermione asked. The question was genuine, not hostile. "Because slow paths are survivable ones," Dumbledore said. "I have watched very powerful, very brilliant people destroy themselves and everyone around them through haste. I was afraid of that." "That's a real reason," Harry said. "I'm not dismissing it, but the slow path has a body count too." He thought of Cedric, of Sirius, of names on a list that kept growing. "We are done with slow." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, then he nodded. "Yes," he said quietly, "I think you are." Word got out, as it always did at Hogwarts, in the particular accelerated way that boarding school gossip travels, through the portrait network first, because portraits saw everything and gossiped mercilessly, and then through the students, and then in some slightly fractured game of telephone version through the staff. By dinner, people were looking at Harry and Hermione. Not the usual looking, not the "there's Harry Potter" looking or the "there's the girl who always knows the answer" looking. This was different. Harry had spent 6 years being looked at, and he knew the varieties with the fluency of someone who had catalogued them by necessity. The celebrity curiosity look, the pity look, the suspicion look, the hero worship look. This was none of those. This was the look you give something you're trying to understand. He sat down at the Gryffindor table next to Ron, and Ron handed him a piece of bread without comment, which was Ron's love language in situations where he was processing something large and wasn't ready to use words yet. "People are saying your boggart turned into a door," Ron said after a minute. "That's roughly accurate," Harry said, "and that the floor shook." "It didn't shake physically." "Right." Ron ate some soup. "And Seamus says Parvati told him that Lavender told her that the portraits on the second floor were all talking about the Peverells." Harry looked across the table at Hermione. She was cutting her food with a precise, automatic efficiency that meant her mind was elsewhere, the knowledge library presumably still cataloguing itself. "Ron," Harry said. "Yeah, we'll tell you everything, I promise. We're still processing some of it ourselves." Ron nodded. He was quiet for another minute in the particular way that meant he was deciding whether to say the next thing. "You both feel different," he said. "Like, I don't know how to describe it, like when you walk into a room and there's a fire in the grate, you can just feel that there's more heat in it." "Is that a bad thing?" Hermione asked. She tuned back in, apparently, and was watching Ron with something careful in her expression. "Didn't say it was," Ron said. Which Harry thought was Ron at his best, the instinct toward acceptance running ahead of the discomfort, even when the discomfort was real. He appreciated it genuinely, even as he noticed the effort it was costing. Across the great hall at the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy was watching them. Not with the usual studied contempt, that was gone, replaced by something Harry could now read with uncomfortable clarity: calculation and unease in approximately equal measure. Malfoy had grown up in a family that understood old magic, old bloodlines, old power, and whatever he was feeling right now, it wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. He knew what Peverell meant. Harry met his eyes deliberately. Malfoy looked away first, which was new. "Heads up," Hermione said quietly. "McGonagall." Professor McGonagall appeared at Harry's shoulder with the soft-footed efficiency of a cat and the expression of someone who has had a very strange afternoon and is holding it together through sheer competence. "Dumbledore would like to see you both again after dinner," she said. 8 o'clock. He's invited several people." "What kind of people?" Harry asked. McGonagall's mouth pressed into a line, not disapproving, but the expression of someone who has information they are reserving. The kind that tend to arrive by portkey, she said and walked on. Hermione set her fork down. The Ministry, she said. That was fast, Ron said. Old magical recognition events tend to trigger alert protocols in the Ministry's monitoring charms network, Hermione said. I didn't know that this morning, I do now. A small, odd expression crossed her face, not quite satisfied, not quite unsettled. I'm going to have to get used to that. Does it feel like someone talking? Harry asked. No, it feels like remembering something I already knew, which is stranger, honestly. She picked her fork back up. The Ministry will want to assess us, catalogue us, possibly try to register us under some obscure statute I haven't heard of yet but almost certainly exists. Are we going to let them? Ron asked. Harry looked at Hermione, the same wordless exchange, quick, complete. No, Harry said. Ron absorbed this. Right, he said in the tone of someone tucking a piece of information away for later. Good. Outside the great hall's enchanted ceiling, the October sky had darkened to a proper October blue-black, and the candles floating above the 4 long tables cast their usual warm, familiar light, and everything looked exactly like it always did, but Harry could feel the difference. He could feel it in the way his magic sat in his chest, not heavier exactly but more present, more available, like a muscle that has been properly warmed up for the first time. He could feel it in the way the ancient magic of the castle itself registered around him, the Hogwarts wards and the Hogwarts stones and 400 years of accumulated enchantment, and it all felt legible in a way it never had before. And underneath the castle, faint but findable, he could feel 5 points of cold darkness, 5 fragments of a shattered soul scattered across the country, and he knew with a calm certainty that hadn't existed in him this morning, that they were going to go out and deal with each one, and that they were going to do it soon, and that when it was done, it would be done completely. He ate his dinner. He let Ron talk about Quidditch tactics in a determined, normalizing way that Harry found genuinely helpful. He watched Hermione's eyes go slightly distant twice more as the library behind them catalogued another chapter. At 7:55 they walked up to Dumbledore's office, and Harry noticed that he walked differently. Not a strut, nothing as foolish as that, but differently, in the way that a person who knows exactly what they're carrying walks differently from one who is guessing. Straight-backed, unrushed, the wand in his pocket feeling less like a tool and more like an extension of something fundamental. Ready, Hermione said at the gargle, for the Ministry showing up to try and put us in a box. He glanced at her. Yes, good, she said, and there was something in her voice, something brisk and bright and sharp that was entirely recognizably Hermione, but with all the apology burned out of it. The gargle stepped aside. They walked up. Chapter 2, The Weight of Old Magic. The Ministry contingent arrived via the fireplace at 8:03. There were 4 of them. Harry catalogued them in the time it took the green flames to settle the particular, automatic assessment that 6 years of danger had wired into him. First out was a man in immaculate robes the color of dried blood, carrying a leather satchel and wearing the smooth, practiced expression of someone who had delivered bad news professionally for years and had stopped noticing that it was bad. Behind him came a woman with close-cropped silver hair and eyes that moved over the room the way a security detail's eyes move, checking corners, checking exits, landing on Harry and Hermione and staying there. Third was a younger wizard, clearly junior, holding a clipboard in the same anxious way Lupin had held his earlier, as though the clipboard were the only stable object in a tilting world. The fourth was Cornelius Fudge. Harry hadn't expected Fudge. The Minister for Magic didn't make house calls. The fact that he had told Harry more about how the Ministry's monitoring systems had registered this afternoon's events than any amount of explanation could have. Fudge had aged visibly in the year since Voldemort's return had become undeniable. The lime-green bowler hat was absent for once, replaced by formal grey robes, and the bluster that Harry had always associated with him, that particular defensive bluster of a man committed to not knowing things, had receded into something that looked considerably more like fear. He swept the room with a look that tried to be authoritative and landed somewhere around anxious, and then his eyes found Harry and something in the look said, of course you're at the center of this, in a tone that wasn't quite accusation. Dumbledore was on his feet, hand extended, the perfect host. McGonagall stood by the window in a way that managed to suggest she was simply standing there and also blocking the window as an exit. Lupin was present, seated to one side, the expression on his face the carefully neutral one he wore in situations where he was watching and learning and reserving judgment. Cornelius, Dumbledore said warmly, and Percival, good of you to come personally. This to the man in dried blood robes, who Harry now identified by the slight dip of Dumbledore's head as someone significant. And Aura Savage, always a pleasure. Please sit down. The man named Percival, and Harry caught Hermione's fractional intake of breath beside him, the one that meant she'd just accessed a relevant piece of information, was Percival Alderton, head of the Department of Mysteries, the Unspeakable's boss, which explained the smooth blankness of expression. Unspeakables cultivated that blankness the way other people cultivated smiles. They sat. The junior wizard with the clipboard took a position against the wall and activated what Harry could now identify without having to think about it as a recording charm on the quill attached to the clipboard. Old habit of the ministries, everything documented, everything on record, everything available later for whatever legal use might become necessary. He kept that observation to himself for now. Mr. Potter, Fudge said, getting to it faster than Harry had expected. Miss Granger. We're here because, well, I think you know why we're here. The Peverell recognition event, Hermione said matter-of-factly. Fudge blinked. Alderton's smooth expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes sharpened in a way that reminded Harry of a camera focusing. You're familiar with the terminology, Alderton said. I'm familiar with most things. I've spent the last 2 hours reading about, Hermione said. She hadn't brought a book. The reading had been internal, which Alderton clearly hadn't anticipated. The event triggered 17 separate monitoring charms on the Ministry's ambient magic detection grid, Alderton said, opening his satchel and producing a thin folder. The signature profile was classified until 6 months ago when I personally had it re-examined and recatalogued. We have been watching for events of this type for a long time. He paused. I should be honest with you, since you have clearly already acquired a degree of information I hadn't anticipated. The last time a Peverell recognition event was recorded was 1899 in Scotland. It was a partial recognition, a single air, and it lasted approximately 4 seconds before the event collapsed. What happened today lasted considerably longer and involved 2 simultaneous subjects. He looked at them both. That is not a thing we have protocols for. I know, Hermione said. I also know why. The Peverell bloodline was expected to express in a single descendant because that's how it expressed every other time. 2 simultaneous heirs, equal and joint, hasn't happened because the conditions for it have never previously existed. And what conditions would those be? Alderton asked, and his tone was studiously neutral, but his posture had shifted forward almost imperceptibly. 2 heirs whose magical signatures are so thoroughly cross-referenced by years of combined casting that they function as a single source when measured from outside, Hermione said. Harry and I have been casting in tandem, backing each other up, sharing magical workload for 6 years. Our magical signatures aren't identical, they're distinct, but they're fluent with each other. The bloodline couldn't distinguish between us as separate candidates, because on the level where the recognition operates, we aren't fully separate. We're a pair. The room absorbed this. Harry noticed Ron, seated quietly in the corner where Dumbledore had placed a chair for him with the slight air of someone who'd known Ron would be there and prepared accordingly, was watching Hermione with an expression that was working very hard to stay neutral and not quite succeeding. The word pair was sitting in the room like a stone someone had dropped, and Harry was aware of it, and he was aware of Ron being aware of it, and he filed that under things to deal with later and returned his attention to Alderton. The Ministry's position, Alderton said carefully, is that events of this magnitude require assessment. We have a responsibility to understand the full scope of what has occurred and to ensure appropriate. No, Harry said. Alderton stopped. I don't mean to be rude, Harry continued, and his voice was entirely even conversational, even the way he'd noticed very confident people could be when they didn't need volume or heat to make a point. But I know what appropriate oversight looks like in practice in the Ministry's hands, and what it looks like is umbrage, what it looks like is educational decrees, what it looks like is trying to put a thumb on something you're afraid of. He looked at Alderton steadily. We're not going to be assessed, catalogued, registered, or managed. Whatever statute you've pulled out of the archives on the way over here, he glanced at the folder, I'd put it away. Fudge made a sound. It started as an objection and became something less certain when Harry looked at him. Harry didn't do anything with the look, no magic, no intimidation, nothing deliberate. He simply looked, the way he'd been looking at things since this afternoon, which was apparently enough. Harry, Dumbledore said quietly, not a warning, more like a musician acknowledging a player who's arrived early on a cue. The Ministry's concern is understandable, Harry said, not softening his position but adjusting its presentation. I understand why you're here. I understand why an unrepeated magical event involving a student in the middle of a war is something you want handled. What I'm telling you is that it's already being handled by us. You're 16 years old, the Aura Savage said. Her voice was direct and uninflected, and Harry respected it. Yes, Harry said, and I've killed a basilisk with a sword, faced Voldemort 4 times, produced a corporeal patronus at 13, and this afternoon discovered I'm the heir to the most ancient magical bloodline in Britain. I'm not asking for permission to be taken seriously. I'm informing you that I'm going to be regardless. The silence was the kind that has texture. Hermione spoke into it. There's a practical matter that supersedes the bureaucratic one, she said. We know how to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, all of them, quickly, safely, and without catastrophic collateral magical damage. We know where several of them are, and we have the means to locate the rest. She looked at Alderton. If the Ministry's priority is ending the current war, which I'd hope it is, then the most useful thing you can do tonight is not waste everyone's time trying to register us under the Extraordinary Magical Phenomena Act of 1723. Alderton went very still. How do you know about the 1723 Act? I just told you, Hermione said pleasantly. I've been reading. Fudge had been tracking the conversation with the expression of a man on a boat in rough weather, watching the horizon and trying to determine whether the next wave would be manageable. He cleared his throat. It was a political throat clearing, the kind that precedes a reframing. No one is suggesting anything adversarial here, he said. We are all on the same side. What the Ministry wants, what I want, is simply to understand what we're dealing with and to ensure that the full resources of the Ministry are available to assist. There is one thing the Ministry can do, Harry said. Fudge stopped. Yes, Amelia Bones, make her head of the DMLE with full operational authority and no interference from this office or any other. She's been functionally hamstrung for 2 years. He said it calmly, the way he would have asked for something to eat. If you want a partnership, that's the partnership. You restore proper function to your law enforcement apparatus, you let us work, and when it's over you stay out of how we did it. Fudge stared at him. Across the room, McGonagall had developed a very slight, very controlled expression that in a less disciplined woman might have been a smile. Lupin was examining the middle distance with great attention. Dumbledore had his hands folded in his lap and an expression of benign interest that fooled nobody. That's a considerable demand, Fudge said. It's a reasonable one, Harry said. And it costs you nothing because you were going to give Bones the authority eventually anyway when the situation got bad enough. We're just ahead of the timeline. Alderton spoke before Fudge could. Mr. Potter. There was something different in his voice now, not the careful bureaucratic neutrality of before, but something more direct. May I ask you a personal question, not for the record? He glanced at the clipboard and the junior wizard made a small gesture that deactivated the recording quill. Do you understand what being a Peverell heir means? Not tactically, not strategically. What it means about death? Harry looked at him. The question wasn't hostile. It was the question of a man who dealt with mysteries professionally and had just encountered one he genuinely didn't understand. Ignotus Peverell made the cloak because he understood that death isn't the enemy, Harry said. It's a destination. The problem was never dying. The problem was being afraid of dying, which makes people do terrible things to try to avoid it. He paused. Tom Riddle is afraid of dying. That's the entire architecture of his threat, the Horcruxes, the followers, the terror. All of it is a man who is so afraid of one inevitable thing that he spent his whole life making everything around him worse. Harry's voice was steady and thoughtful. I'm not afraid of it. I haven't been, not really, since I was 13 and I understood what a Dementor was showing me. He looked at Alderton. Does that answer your question? Partially, Alderton said. And Miss Granger? Hermione considered for a moment. The Peverell legacy isn't a weapon, she said. Though it can be applied that way, it's knowledge, the deep understanding of magic at its most fundamental level. Antioch Peverell made a weapon because he only understood power through domination. Cadmus Peverell made a tool for grief because he couldn't accept loss. Ignotus made a shelter, something to keep the vulnerable safe. She paused. Harry carries the instinct for the third approach. I carry the knowledge of the second with the understanding of where it went wrong. Together, it's different from either alone. It's the whole set, Lupin said quietly from his corner and then looked slightly surprised at himself for speaking. It's the whole set, Hermione agreed. Alderton closed his folder. He didn't put it back in his satchel, he set it on the table in front of him, which Harry read correctly as a gesture of deliberate openness. The Department of Mysteries has been studying Peverell historical records for 40 years, Alderton said. We have material that nobody outside the department has accessed. I would like to make that available to you. Why? Harry asked, genuinely curious. Because I am a man who has spent 40 years studying mysteries, Alderton said simply. And you two are the most interesting thing I've encountered in all of them. I would rather be useful to you than obstruct you. Fudge made a slightly strangled sound. The sound of a politician watching a conversation escaped the political framework he'd brought to contain it. The bones matter, Harry said, looking back at the minister. Fudge was quiet for a moment. In the moment's quiet, Harry watched him calculate the political cost versus the political alternative, the optics of resistance versus the optics of reasonableness, the very old and very human arithmetic of a man deciding that a thing he was going to have to do eventually might as well be done now and credited to him as a choice. I'll speak to Amelia tomorrow, Fudge said. The ministry contingent left at 9:30. Alderton paused at the fireplace and reached into his satchel and produced a small card, black with silver lettering. This will reach me directly, he said, and handed it to Hermione rather than Harry, which Harry noted as a piece of accurate assessment. Use it when you need the archives. Then they were gone, and the office held only its regulars, and the fire settled back to its usual modest height, and Fawkes made a low, resonant sound on his perch that felt like a verdict of some kind. Amelia Bones, Dumbledore said. She should have had full authority 2 years ago, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore agreed without a trace of deflection, which was so unlike him that Lupin looked up sharply. She should have, you were right to push it. He looked at Harry over his glasses again, and the look was different from the one he'd worn this morning. There was less careful management in it and more of something that was working toward plain respect. I want to discuss the Horcruxes. We know of 6 remaining, Hermione said. The locket, which you already knew about and which is currently in Grimmauld Place, the cup of Hufflepuff, the diadem of Ravenclaw Nagini, an object we haven't yet identified that was among Voldemort's early trophies, and she glanced at Harry. And me, Harry said. Lupin made a quiet, involuntary sound. It's all right, Remus, Harry said. It is demonstrably not all right, Lupin said with some feeling. It's solvable, Hermione said, which for her was the same thing as all right. She pulled out a piece of parchment from her robe pocket. She'd been making notes since dinner, Harry knew, the library knowledge translating itself into structured form the way it always did with her, order imposed on information as a matter of deep instinct. The extraction ritual requires 3 days of preparation, a ritual space with specific geometric properties, and a second practitioner to hold the living anchor point. The soul fragment in a living host is threaded into the subject's own magic in a way that requires very careful separation. Brutal force will damage Harry's core, which we're not doing. She looked at Dumbledore. Do you have access to the old ritual chamber beneath the castle, the pre-Hogwarts space? Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You know about the chamber. It's in the castle's foundational wards. I can feel it. She said it simply. It has the right geometry. It's been inactive for about 800 years, but the structural integrity is sound. I have access, Dumbledore said slowly. I will admit that I didn't know anyone outside of 2 previous headmasters was aware of it. Things are different now, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, they rather are. He left the office at 10:15, which was so far past curfew it was almost funny, and Dumbledore had given them signed permission slips that Harry suspected McGonagall had prepared before they'd even arrived, because McGonagall was that kind of person. The corridor outside the office was quiet, the portraits mostly asleep, the torches burning low on the walls. Their footsteps were soft on the stone. They were halfway to Gryffindor Tower when Hermione said, Ron's going to struggle with this. I know, not maliciously, the way he looks at things, he organizes the world by certain categories and she made a gesture that meant detonated several of them. He'll be okay, Harry said, you're very certain of that. I've known him for 6 years. When he decides to be all right with something, he's genuinely all right with it. He just needs the space to get there. Harry paused. The word pair is what stuck. Hermione was quiet for a beat. I noticed that it landed. Did it land for you? Another beat shorter. It was an accurate description. It was, Harry agreed. They walked in comfortable quiet for a moment. The castle was doing what old buildings do at night, settling, breathing, the soft creak and shift of ancient stone with ancient magic running through it, all of which Harry could now feel in a way he hadn't this morning, the entire building like a living thing around him, warm and vast and known. Can I ask you something? Hermione said, you never ask permission to ask things. I'm asking now. Then yes, when he touched your shoulder in the wherever that was, she framed the question carefully, and Harry understood why, because it was the sort of question that mattered more than its surface would suggest. What did you feel? Harry thought about this honestly. Like someone who'd been worried about me for a very long time had finally decided I was going to be okay, he said. Hermione absorbed that. And when Cadmus, he started. Like being told I'd been right, but that being right wasn't the whole story, she said quietly. Like getting the answer and discovering the answer asked 2 more questions. Does that bother you? No, she said, and she sounded genuinely surprised to discover that it didn't. It feels right, actually, like that's what learning is supposed to feel like. They reached the portrait of the fat lady, who was awake and considerably more interested in them than usual, and gave the password and climbed through into the common room. Ron was sitting by the fire. He'd clearly tried to go to bed and failed, and had come back down and was sitting in his usual chair with a mug of cold tea and the expression of a person who has been sitting with a thought long enough that the thought has started to soften around the edges. All right, Harry said. Mostly, Ron said. Then the ministry was here. Yes, and Fudge is giving Bones full DMLE authority. Ron stared. How? Harry asked. Hermione said simply. Ron looked between them. The fire popped softly. Outside, rain had started against the tower windows. The soft, steady rain of October that had always made the common room feel like the most contained, safest place in the world. And Ron was looking at his 2 best friends with an expression that was honest in the way only Ron could be honest, unguarded, all the layers visible, the uncertainty and the fierce underlying loyalty running side by side like 2 rivers that have always shared the same valley. Are you going to tell me everything? He asked. As Harry said, including. Ron's jaw shifted slightly, including the bit about you being what Hermione described, the Horcrux. Yes, Harry said, and she can fix it. She can fix it. Ron exhaled. Okay. He picked up the cold tea, looked at it, put it down. I'm not going to pretend that today was normal. It wasn't. You're both. You feel different and the world keeps moving, and I feel like. He stopped. Like we're already 3 steps ahead, Harry said. Yeah. Ron, Harry leaned forward, elbows on knees. This isn't us leaving you behind. This was dropped on us 6 hours ago. We're all still figuring it out. I know, Ron said, and mostly meant it. I need some time to be the version of me that's properly fine with it, rather than just the version that's pretending. Take the time, Hermione said. Just don't do it alone. Don't go quiet on us. Ron looked at her. Something passed between them, not the particular frequency she shared with Harry, but something else. The warm, comfortable frequency of 2 people who had fought and forgiven and fought again and known throughout all of it that the underneath was solid. Since when do I go quiet? He said. Since never, she admitted. That was more of a general principle. Right. He pushed himself to his feet. I'm going to bed. And tomorrow you're going to tell me all of it, and I'm going to be properly fine with it, and then I'm going to help. He pointed at both of them in the particular Ronish way that made the pointing feel more like an embrace. Yeah, Harry said. Ron headed for the stairs. At the bottom step he paused. Harry, he said without turning around. Yeah, glad it was you, the Peverell thing. A pause. Glad it was both of you if it had to be anyone. He went upstairs. Harry and Hermione sat with the fire for a moment. "He means that," Hermione said quietly. "I know he does. It still costs him something to say it." "Yeah," Harry looked at the fire. "That's what makes it mean something." The rain against the windows picked up slightly, a gust of wind throwing it harder against the glass for a moment before settling. The common room was empty except for them, and the fire, and the painting of a pastoral scene on the far wall, where a small dog was currently asleep under a painted oak tree. Harry felt the castle around them, the ancient layered magic of it, 400 years of children learning and growing and leaving and coming back in memory, all of it encoded in the stone, and he felt the 5 cold points of darkness out in the world, and he felt the thing in himself, the fragment, the unwanted passenger, the accidental Horcrux, and none of it felt impossible anymore. 3 days, he said. 3 days, Hermione confirmed. She was already pulling the parchment back out, the notes, the ritual preparation checklist that had begun to compile itself in her mind the moment she'd accessed the knowledge. "I'll need specific materials. The ritual space will need to be prepared. There are geometric requirements that translate into physical arrangements, certain runes positioned at exact points." "Tell me what to do," Harry said. She looked at him sideways, a brief look, almost amused. "You realize that in 3 days you're going to be sitting in an 800-year-old ritual chamber while I perform something that hasn't been done since the 15th century. And this is different from a normal Tuesday. How exactly?" She actually smiled then, the full one, the one that was mostly reserved for things that were genuinely funny rather than just academically amusing, and bent back over her parchment, and the fire crackled, and the rain kept coming down, and somewhere in the castle Filch was probably wandering around being outraged about something, and the world was changing at a rate that should have been terrifying. Harry found that it wasn't. He found, sitting in the warm red-gold familiar comfort of the Gryffindor common room while Hermione wrote and the rain fell, that what he mostly felt was ready. Something was coming, had been coming for 16 years in fact, and for the first time in all that time he felt like himself. Not the boy who survived by accident, not the reluctant hero who didn't ask for any of this, not the variable in someone else's plan. Just himself, awake and capable and done with waiting. He sat with it for a while, then he said, "What do you need first?" Hermione handed him half her parchment without looking up. "Start making a list of everything we know about the locket. We'll start there." He did. 2 floors above them in the astronomy tower a small owl had arrived, grey ministry marked, carrying a sealed letter. It landed on the windowsill, rapped twice with its beak and waited. Inside the letter in Cornelius Fudge's handwriting were the words, "Bones appointment confirmed, effective immediately. Please advise on next steps. We are prepared to cooperate." CF the owl waited. No one was there to receive it. It waited a while longer, then tucked the letter into a crevice in the stonework with the efficient stubbornness of trained ministry owls and flew back into the rain. The letter sat in the stones of the tower, dry and sealed, waiting for morning. Below, the castle breathed. Chapter 3. The map of enemies. Luna Lovegood found them in the library at 6 in the morning. Not because she'd been looking, or at least, not in the way most people looked for things. She came through the library door with the particular unhurried quality she brought to everything, her robes slightly askew, her radish earrings catching the early grey light from the windows, carrying a copy of the Quibbler folded under one arm and a cup of something that steamed in colours that didn't have names. She walked past 3 rows of shelves, turned left at Ancient Runes, and arrived at the table where Harry and Hermione had been working since 5 in the morning without any evidence of surprise. She sat down across from them, looked at the spread of parchment, the annotated maps, the list of Horcrux locations in Hermione's precise hand, the separate list in Harry's less precise but equally organized hand of every known Death Eater operative with ministry access. Then she looked at Harry and Hermione themselves, the way she looked at most things, with the open, unguarded attention of someone who was interested in what was actually there rather than what was supposed to be. "You've woken up," she said to Harry. He looked up from the map. "Good morning, Luna. I don't mean today, I mean generally." She set the Quibbler on the table. "You've been awake for about 12 hours now, I think, in the way that matters." "Were you expecting it?" Hermione asked. "Daddy wrote about the Peverell resonance signs in 1997. I mean, he will write about them. He hasn't yet. The convergence of 2 magically integrated practitioners at a site of old power during a high-tension ritual environment." Luna sipped her strange tea. "I thought it might be you too. The signatures fit." Harry and Hermione looked at each other. "She's describing what triggered the recognition event," Hermione said slowly. "The conditions we laid out for Alderton last night." "Daddy calls it sympathetic magical integration," Luna said. "It's not well understood because most people don't notice when it's happening to them. You 2 have been doing it since 3rd year at least, probably earlier." She turned a page of the Quibbler. On the cover was a large illustration of something that looked like a cross between a badger and a weather vane. "What are you working on?" "Finding Voldemort's Horcruxes," Harry said, because Luna was someone you could say things to directly. She received them directly, and that was that. "The cup is in Bellatrix Lestrange's vault," Luna said without looking up from her magazine. "Gringotts vault number 711. She moved it there 3 months ago from Malfoy Manor because she doesn't trust Narcissa's loyalties anymore, and she was right not to." A pause. "The diadem is in the room of requirement, in the part that stores things people want to hide." Hermione had her quill out and was writing before Luna finished the sentence. Harry watched this, the absolute unshowiness of Luna, who delivered precise intelligence with the same tone most people used to comment on the weather, and felt a retroactive embarrassment at how long they'd slept on what she was capable of. "How do you know about the vault?" Harry asked. "I hear things," Luna said simply. "People don't pay attention to me in most conversations, which means they have conversations in front of me. Bellatrix mentioned the vault to Fenrir Greyback at the Lestrange estate in August. I was visiting the newts in the garden." She turned another page. "I wasn't there voluntarily, but I was there so." "Luna." Hermione set her quill down, and when Hermione set her quill down mid-note, it meant something significant had occurred to her. "Are you in contact with Death Eaters regularly?" "Not contact exactly," Luna said. "Proximity, they don't see me as a threat, which is useful." She finally looked up from the magazine, and her eyes, large, pale, the exact grey of the sky outside, were considerably more focused than their usual dreaming quality. "I know the difference between being overlooked and being safe. I've been careful." A pause. "Though it's been lonelier than I'd like." The sentence landed quietly in the space between them, and Harry felt something shift, not the world shifting of the previous afternoon, nothing as seismic as that, but the smaller, more personal shift of recognizing that someone had been carrying a weight they hadn't asked for and had been carrying it alone. "You should have told us," he said. "You weren't ready to know," she said, not reproachfully. "You are now." She looked at his list of Death Eater Ministry operatives. Thickness. "He's already been imperieused, has been for 6 weeks. He's being kept functional enough to avoid detection, but he makes small errors, uses his left hand when he's always been right-handed, forgets the names of people he's known for years. If you look at his recent DMLE memos, there are 3 internal contradictions that don't make sense for someone in command of their own faculties." Hermione pulled a fresh piece of parchment. "Who else?" "Runcorn in magical law enforcement is not imperieused. He's willing. He's been reporting on Muggle-born registration discussions to Voldemort's inner circle for 8 months. Luna's voice stayed calm, and even throughout this, the voice of someone reporting facts because facts were what was needed. Yaxley is working to replace Thickness before Thickness's imperious becomes obvious to someone less distracted than Fudge. Yaxley's placement means Voldemort expects to take the ministry within the year, Hermione said, half to herself, writing rapidly. "He's not building toward it, he's already executing the transition plan." "Yes," Luna said. Harry leaned back in his chair and looked at the map of Britain on the table, the real one, not the school maps, the full thing with every wizard settlement and magical site marked in fading ink that Hermione had sourced from the restricted section through channels that Harry hadn't asked about. 5 cold points that he could feel even now, even here, like a persistent low hum at the edge of perception. The locket, Grimmauld Place, confirmed. The cup, Gringotts, Vault 711. New intelligence, courtesy of Luna. The diadem, Room of Requirement, new intelligence, same source. Nagini, wherever Voldemort was, which was currently. Harry pressed his attention carefully outward, using the new sense with a precision he was still calibrating southeast of London. A house. A large house with a smell of old wood and dark magic and something cold. The unknown object, unknown, that was still the gap. And himself, 5 targets, one of which lived in his own skull. "Luna," Harry said, "the 5th Horcrux, an object, something Voldemort considered a trophy, probably taken around the time of his first rise to power. Does that mean anything to you?" Luna was quiet for a moment, the particular quality of silence she had when she was genuinely thinking rather than simply pausing. Bertha Jorkins mentioned something before she disappeared. She'd been at a party at Rookwood's house in 1979 and saw Voldemort give Rookwood something gold and flat and very old. Her words were like a medallion, but wrong, wrong in the way a taxidermied animal is wrong, correct in shape but incorrect in substance. Luna looked at the table. She forgot about it because of a memory modification, but the edges of the memory survived, and she talked about it when she was confused. Someone was listening. She paused. "I think it's a medallion associated with Slytherin. The Slytherin family had a second heirloom besides the locket, less famous, a seal of some kind." Hermione's quill stopped moving. "The Slytherin seal," she said, and her voice had the quality it got when a piece of information she'd been holding as interesting but unconnected suddenly connected. "It's documented in Bathilda Bagshot's unedited personal notes. There's a copy in the restricted section, not the main text, the notes, as an object of particular historical significance given that it was supposed to have been destroyed in the 1500s when the Slytherin estate was liquidated. If it survived and Voldemort found it," she wrote something quickly. "It's at Rookwood's estate, or was. I can narrow it." "Do that," Harry said. "Already doing it." She didn't look up. Luna refilled her tea from a small flask she produced from her pocket. The tea steamed the same unnameable colors. "You're going to go to Gringotts," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "I want to come." He looked at her. She looked back. "I've been gathering information for a year and a half," she said without heat. "Not for myself. I don't have a self-serving reason to know which Death Eater uses which courier route or how many Snatchers are operating in the Manchester area. I've been waiting for there to be someone to give it to." She paused. "I'm not asking to be protected, I'm asking to be used properly." "You're in," Harry said. Hermione looked up. A slight look passed between her and Harry, the quick, complete exchange. We'll need a fourth in any case, she said. For the Gringotts run specifically, the extraction in Lestrange's vault will require someone managing the external approach while we're inside. I'm very good at being ignored in a crowd, Luna said serenely. That's exactly what we need, Harry said. They told Ron at breakfast. Not everything, the full debrief would come later, the strategic picture, the timeline. What they told him over eggs and toast and strong tea was the immediate plan. Gringotts first within the week. The cup needed to come out of Bellatrix's vault before Voldemort had reason to move it. The diadem could wait a few days because the room of requirement wasn't going anywhere. The extraction ritual for Hermione had the preparation list finalized. 3 days. The ritual chamber below the castle, Dumbledore had agreed to arrange access, needed to happen before they moved on the living Horcrux, which was Nagini, which was the most dangerous one because it meant getting close to Voldemort. Ron ate through this recitation with the focused, slightly grim expression of someone installing new information into a framework that was still being built. When Harry got to the part about the extraction ritual, Ron stopped eating. 3 days, Ron said. 3 days, Harry confirmed. And it's safe, it's manageable, Hermione said, which was honest and which Ron clearly recognized as honest and which he clearly didn't love, but he nodded. And Gringotts, Ron said. How are you planning to get into Lestrange's vault specifically? They have the security on the high-security vaults we know the security, Hermione said. I know the override sequence for the Gemino curse the vault almost certainly has. I know the countermeasure for the Flagrante curse. The thief's downfall is the main barrier. It strips disguises and magical enhancements, but it won't work on what we are now because what we are isn't a charm or a disguise. It's constitutional. Constitutional, Ron repeated slowly. Our magic is different at the foundational level now, she said. Not in a way that looks different from outside, not most of the time, but a curse that strips magical enhancements will find nothing to strip because there's nothing enhanced, it's just us. Ron absorbed this. Right, he picked up his fork. Right, okay, and Luna's coming, Harry said. Ron looked across the great hall to the Ravenclaw table where Luna was eating alone, as she usually did, with her magazine propped against a goblet. As they watched, Zacharias Smith said something to her in passing that was clearly dismissive, and Luna looked at him with the same serene, unruffled attention she gave to everything and said something in return that made Smith's face do something complicated. He walked on quickly. She knows things, Ron said. She knows a lot of things, Harry confirmed. Ron was quiet for a moment. I've been an idiot about Luna, haven't I? A bit, Hermione said, not maliciously. Still, he put his fork down, turned in his seat and waited until Luna glanced their way. Then he waved, not a casual wave, a deliberate one, the kind that meant something. Luna looked at it for a moment with her large, steady eyes, and then she smiled, not her usual distant half-smile but something more direct, more present, and went back to her magazine. Ron turned back to his breakfast. Okay, he said, what do you need me to do? They needed several things as it turned out, and Ron was good at all of them. He was exceptionally good specifically at moving through the castle without attracting attention while apparently doing nothing at all, which was a skill born of 6 years of carefully maintained ordinariness. Harry and Hermione were whatever else they were notable. People noticed them. People particularly noticed them now, in the new post-recognition atmosphere that had settled over the castle in the preceding 24 hours. The particular charged quality of a place where everyone knows something important has happened, but no one can fully articulate what. Ron could cross the castle carrying a list of materials, delivering messages, arranging things, and nobody registered it because Ron Weasley moving through a corridor was approximately the least suspicious thing Hogwarts contained. By mid-morning through Ron they had confirmation from Dumbledore that the ritual chamber would be accessible starting the following day, giving them their 3-day preparation window. A message to Alderton at the Department of Mysteries requesting the Peverell Archives material, specifically anything relating to soul fragment extraction in living subjects. A discreet arrangement with Professor Flitwick, who had been told a partial version of events enough to be useful filtered through Dumbledore to have the room of requirement temporarily sealed against all non-authorized entry. Harry and Hermione taught their morning classes. This was important and they both knew it was important. The appearance of continuity wasn't performance, it was strategic. If Voldemort's people inside the castle noticed a disruption to routine, it would travel, and what needed to travel instead was nothing. Normalcy. 2 sixth-year students attending their lessons, turning in homework, eating meals in the Great Hall. Potions with Slughorn was manageable because Slughorn was primarily interested in collecting impressive people, and Harry was now, to Slughorn's evident delight and mild terror, considerably more impressive than before. Man kept glancing at Harry with an expression that sat between academic fascination and social calculation, trying to work out how the Peverell development changed the arithmetic of his collection. Remarkable, Slughorn said, pausing behind Harry's workstation and peering at his cauldron. Quite remarkable. Your instinct for the brewing sequence has always been, but now it's as if you're reading the potion's own process. I am a bit, Harry said. Slughorn blinked. I beg your pardon. I can sense the magical state of what's in the cauldron, not taste or smell exactly, more like pressure. When it shifts, it means the reaction's at a stage. Harry looked up at him. Is that useful to know for grading purposes or alarming? Slughorn opened and closed his mouth once. I'm going to put outstanding on this and move along, he said. Hermione, 2 workstations over, caught Harry's eye and pressed her lips together very firmly. They found the first sign of active surveillance at 2:30. Hermione spotted it. She spotted most things, but this she spotted before Harry did, which meant the new perceptual layer was slightly more developed in him in some areas, physical, magical, spatial, and more developed in her in others, including the detection of patterns, the slight wrongness of a thing that should belong and doesn't. They were in the corridor outside the Charms classroom after the lesson, and Hermione said very quietly and without breaking her stride, "Third window on the left, the one with the cracked pane. There's a persistent observation charm on the glass, 2-way. Harry didn't look at the window. Since when? Fairly fresh, placed in the last 24 hours. The magical signature is," she paused, accessing the knowledge library, associated with a variant developed in the early 1990s dark magic modification of a standard aura surveillance technique. It's been adapted for covert deployment. Who's on the other end? I can find out. A pause. I could just shut it down, but that tells them we know if I leave it, but feed it, Harry said. Exactly. She glanced sideways at him. There are probably more of them. How many do you think are in the castle working for Voldemort? She thought. More than the staff realized, less than he'd like. A beat. Voldemort wants intelligence, not action, not yet. He's watching. He wants to understand what the Peverell recognition means before he commits to a response. He'll be getting reports. Yes, so we need to be careful about what those reports contain. She shifted the strap of her bag on her shoulder, but not too careful. He'll be suspicious if everything looks completely normal, so we give him something real but not the thing that matters. She nodded once crisply, the nod of a decision made. Tonight in the Great Hall we discuss going to the Ministry, loudly enough to carry, make it look like our next move is institutional and bureaucratic, like we're going to spend the next month in meetings with Alderton and Bones and Dumbledore's various contacts building a formal strategy. While actually doing the ritual and going to Gringotts, in 3 days and 5 days respectively, yes. Harry thought about the 5 cold points on the map, the cup in Bellatrix's vault, the diadem in the Room of Hidden Things, the unknown location of the Slytherin seal, Nagini with Voldemort somewhere southeast of London, and himself. 3 days from now in a chamber 800 years old, while Hermione reached into him with the oldest magic in Britain and carefully, precisely, removed something that had never been meant to be there. He breathed through that thought, let it settle. Fine, he said. Tonight we're very boring and institutional. Try to look slightly frustrated, like you've been told to wait. I've been told to wait my entire life. I can do frustrated. The performance in the Great Hall that evening was, Harry thought, one of the better things they'd done together purely because it required absolutely no lying. Everything they said was technically true. They did plan to work with Bones. They did intend to keep Dumbledore informed. They were going to need ministry resources at some point. None of that was invented. The emphasis was the invention. The suggestion that these were the imminent next steps rather than background logistics. That was the theatre. Luna sat at the Ravenclaw table and didn't acknowledge them, which was correct. Ron ate his dinner with the expression of someone who had been briefed on a plan and was playing his part in it, which was also correct, though his part was simply to eat dinner and look like everything was normal, which Ron was naturally suited for. Draco Malfoy was watching from the Slytherin table again, and this time Harry watched back. He'd been thinking about Malfoy since breakfast. The calculation and unease he'd seen in Malfoy's face the night before had resolved, not into hostility, which would have been simple, but into something more complicated. Malfoy looked like a person who was holding 2 incompatible models of the world and hadn't yet decided which one to drop. His family had served the Dark Lord. His family understood old magic. And his family's allegiance had always been at the deepest level to the preservation of his family, which was not the same thing as allegiance to a cause and never had been. Lucius Malfoy's politics were the politics of a man protecting his interests. His son had been raised in that framework, and whatever else Draco Malfoy was, he was not stupid. He knew what Peverell meant. He knew what it meant for the war's calculus. Harry very deliberately let Malfoy hold the eye contact rather than looking away first, and after a moment he gave a single small nod, not an invitation, not a welcome, just an acknowledgement. I see you, I know what you're considering. Malfoy looked down at his plate. His hand, resting beside it, was entirely still. The first day of ritual preparation began at dawn. The chamber beneath the castle was accessed through a concealed door in the dungeon level, behind a wall that read as solid to every detection charm Harry had previously known, and which now, with the Peverell perception active, read as thin as parchment. Dumbledore met them there at 5 in the morning, handed over a key that was more a word than an object, a specific spoken sequence in a language that predated Latin, and left them to it. The chamber was breathtaking in the way very old things are sometimes breathtaking, not beautiful exactly, but weighty, dense with accumulated time. The ceiling was low and arched, the stone a deeper grey than the castle above, the walls carved with geometric patterns in a continuous sequence that Harry could now read as a sustained magical formula, a kind of architectural spellwork that had been maintaining the chamber's magical integrity for 8 centuries without anybody having to renew it. "This is extraordinary," Hermione said, standing in the center of the space and turning slowly. "That's the first time I've heard you say that about a room," Harry said. "Rooms don't usually deserve it." She was running her fingers along the wall carving, reading it, the library knowledge engaging. "The builders understood what they were doing in a way I don't think they've been given credit for. This isn't just a ritual space, it's a stabilizer. The geometry prevents magical resonance from escalating uncontrollably. Whatever you do in here is contained, amplified but contained." "Amplified," Harry repeated. "Positively, it magnifies precise magic without distorting it." She looked at him. "For what we need to do the extraction, that's ideal, more power available but surgical in application." "Show me what needs to be done," she showed him. The first day was preparation, purely physical. The placement of anchor markers at 7 specific points around the chamber, each one carved from a material the knowledge library specified with maddening precision. Ironwood moonstone chalk from coastal cliffs, 2 others that required sourcing from the Hogwarts greenhouses and one that required a letter to Alderton delivered via Ron, which came back by afternoon with the material and a note that said simply whatever you're preparing for good luck. PA Harry worked through it systematically, following Hermione's instructions, which were clear and detailed, and delivered without the hesitancy she sometimes had when explaining things she'd learned recently rather than things she knew deeply. This she knew deeply. The library had made it hers in the way years of study make something yours, not borrowed, not performed, genuinely integrated. "You trust this completely," he said midway through the afternoon, fitting an ironwood marker into a carved fluorescence. "Yes, not just intellectually." She paused, looking at the marker in his hands. "No, not just intellectually, a beat. I know the Peverells made mistakes. Antioch's weapon was a mistake. Cadmus's grief was a mistake, but their knowledge of soul magic, that wasn't a mistake. That was real scholarship, genuine understanding. I'm not." She searched for the word. "I'm not borrowing someone else's confidence here. I've checked it against everything I know independently. It's sound." "All right," Harry said. "You're not worried," she observed. "No, why not?" He thought about it honestly. "Because you've been doing things I didn't fully understand and trusting them anyway for 6 years," he said. "The Polyjuice potion in 2nd year, the Time Turner in 3rd, the DA lesson plans. I didn't always understand how you'd worked out that something would work, but I've never once seen you be wrong about something you were certain of." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "That's thank you," she said, and her voice was slightly different, slightly less arch and assembled. "That means something more than the grades or the thank you." "Don't make it weird," Harry said. "I'm not making it weird," she said. "I'm accepting a genuine compliment like a normal person." "The face you're making is slightly weird." "My face is doing nothing unusual. It's doing the thing it does when you're pleased about something and trying not to show that you're pleased. I'm going to put you in a moderately uncomfortable position in the ritual out of pure principle," she said, and went back to her calculations. The second day brought company, not invited company, not hostile company either as it turned out, but company that arrived by its own logic. Draco Malfoy was waiting in the corridor outside the Charms classroom at 8:30, and he wasn't there for Charms. He looked, Harry thought, like someone who had spent several days preparing to say a thing and had rehearsed the first line into smoothness but wasn't certain about anything after it. "I need 5 minutes," Malfoy said. Harry looked at him steadily. Beside him, Hermione had gone very still in the way that meant she was reading the situation with full attention. "You've got them," Harry said. Malfoy's jaw shifted slightly. He'd expected negotiation or refusal, and the immediate yes had thrown him. He recovered. "Not here," he said, and walked ahead of them into the empty Charms classroom without looking back, which was either very confident or a piece of body language he'd practiced in a mirror. The classroom was morning empty and light, the desks cleared for the previous night's cleaning, dust motes doing their slow business in the window light. Malfoy stopped at the front and turned, and he looked at them both with the expression of someone delivering a prepared statement and hoping the preparation was enough. "My father is in Azkaban," Malfoy said. "My mother is at the manor and she is not safe. The Dark Lord uses the manor as a base and she has no power to remove him and she cannot ask for help without it being reported back." He paused. "I want her out." "In exchange for what?" Harry asked. "Information," Malfoy said. "I know things about the Inner Circle's plans, the timeline for the Ministry, the location of—" He stopped. "The location of what?" Hermione said. "The Slytherin seal," Malfoy said. "I know where it is." The air in the classroom changed. "Where?" Harry said. Malfoy looked at him. The calculation in his face was doing its complicated mathematics, the cost of this information against the value of what he was buying with it, the gap between the family he'd been raised to be and the choice he was making right now in an empty Charms classroom at 8:30 in the morning. "My aunt has it," he said. "Bellatrix, she keeps it on her person, not in the vault, on her person, on a chain, because she doesn't trust storage. She thinks proximity to the seal gives her access to some of its residual power." A beat. She doesn't have the lineage, but she believes it. "So it's on Bellatrix Lestrange," Harry said. "Yes, and Bellatrix is at the manor," Malfoy said. "Most of the time she comes and goes. She'll be there Thursday." Hermione looked at Harry. The exchange was fast and complete. Gringotts' run was planned for the day after the ritual. If the seal was on Bellatrix rather than in the vault, the Gringotts' trip became purely about the cup, which simplified the vault approach. The seal was a separate problem. Thursday is 3 days from now, Hermione said, the calculation out loud. I know, Malfoy said. He looked back and forth between them, and something in what he saw made his prepared expression shift into something less managed. You're actually going to do it, aren't you? Not plan it, do it. Yes, Harry said. I want my mother out first. We can't get to the manor before Thursday, Hermione said. Not safely, not without Voldemort knowing. There's another way, Harry said. He'd been thinking about it since Malfoy said the manor. Narcissa doesn't have to be physically extracted. She needs plausible cause to leave the manor before Thursday, a reason that Voldemort can't question. He looked at Malfoy. Your mother has a sister other than Bellatrix, Andromeda Tonks. What's the relationship? Malfoy's expression shifted. Non-existent, officially, my family disowned. Would your mother want to see her if she could? Harry asked. The question was gentler than his usual register, and Malfoy heard it, and something in his face did the thing faces do when a question has found something real. Yes, he said, I think yes. Then we get a message to Andromeda. Your mother receives an invitation, family emergency, Andromeda's health, something credible, and she has reason to leave the manor by Wednesday. By Thursday, when Bellatrix is there, Narcissa is already clear. Can you get a message to Andromeda? Malfoy asked. We know someone who can reach most places, Harry said. He was thinking of Luna and her particular talent for moving through spaces without registering. Malfoy looked at the floor for a moment. The prepared statement had been left behind entirely now. He just looked like a 16-year-old who had bet everything on one move. Why are you doing this? He asked. The extraction, all of it, you could just go after him directly. You have the power now. Going after him directly doesn't work while the Horcruxes exist, Harry said. He can't die while they're intact. We're removing his immortality first, then we remove him. He paused. And we're doing it this way rather than the way that involves a lot of people getting hurt, because that's the point of doing it carefully. Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. My father would say that's weakness, caring about collateral damage. Your father is in Azkaban, Harry said, not cruelly, just plainly. Malfoy was quiet. Then yes, he said, he is. The message to Andromeda goes today, Hermione said. Your mother should be at Andromeda's house by Wednesday night. Then you tell us everything you know about Thursday's schedule at the manor. Malfoy looked at her. Something in his expression, looking at Hermione specifically, had always been complicated by the history of the word he'd called her and the person she demonstrably was, and Harry had always thought that someday that cognitive dissonance was going to reach a point where it couldn't sustain itself anymore. Looking at Malfoy's face now, he thought that day was probably today. All right, Malfoy said. He didn't apologize, he didn't try to address it directly, but something in the way he said all right suggested that he understood the weight of what he was being given, and that he wasn't taking it lightly. He left. His footsteps in the corridor were quick and purposeful, the walk of someone who has made a choice and isn't revisiting it. The classroom settled back into its morning quiet. He's going to be useful, Hermione said. He's going to try to be, Harry said, which was different and also fair. Yes, she agreed. That's enough for now. They walked out into the corridor, into the current of students making their way between classes, the ordinary morning noise of the castle flowing around them. Harry felt the 5 cold points on his internal map. And now the seal's location had crystallized too, a 6th point different from the others because it moved, carried on a human body, appearing and disappearing as Bellatrix traveled. 6 targets, 3 days until the ritual, 5 days until Gringotts. The map of enemies was becoming finally a map, and maps, Harry had learned, were only useful when you were ready to move. He was ready to move. Chapter 4, the Horcrux War. The ritual chamber looked different on the 3rd day. The anchor markers were placed, the geometric preparation complete. The floor runes activated in the precise sequence Hermione had worked out across 2 days of careful installation. The carved walls seemed to breathe with something that wasn't quite light, a quality of attention, as if the chamber had been waiting for this specific use for 800 years and recognized it. Harry stood in the center of the 7-point configuration and felt the space settle around him the way a well-fitted room settles, like it knew his dimensions. Hermione was checking her preparations for the 4th time. Not from uncertainty, he recognized the difference now between her checking something because she was unsure and her checking something because precision was how she expressed care, and this was the latter. She moved from marker to marker with the focus of a surgeon arranging instruments, touching each one briefly, confirming the magical resonance, making micro-adjustments that she probably didn't need to make but that made her feel like she'd done everything possible. You can stop, Harry said. I'm nearly done. The room is ready. You've checked it 4 times. This is the 4th time, yes. Hermione. She stopped, turned. She'd tied her hair back tightly in the way she did when she needed it out of her thinking space, and her eyes were very clear and very focused, and underneath the focus something that was trying to be only about the technical work and wasn't quite succeeding. If it hurts, she said, say so. Don't be the version of you that doesn't say so. I'll say so. And if something feels wrong, not uncomfortable, but actually wrong, we stop, we reassess, we don't push through. Agreed. I mean it, Harry, I know you mean it. She looked at him for a moment. The chamber held its particular dense silence around them, the silence of a space that has been waiting a very long time. Okay, she said, sit down. He sat, cross-legged in the center of the configuration, one set to one side, not needed, not for this. The magic here was going to be foundational rather than directed. Hermione took a position 2 feet in front of him, and she stood with her feet shoulder-width apart and her hands open at her sides, palms forward, and she looked like herself and also in the chamber's particular quality of attention like something older than herself. "I'm going to describe what I'm doing as I do it," she said, "so you know what you're feeling and why." "That helps," Harry said. "I know it helps, that's why I'm doing it," she began. What she did was not dramatic in any visual sense. There were no flashes, no great arcs of light, no environmental theatrics of the kind that had accompanied every significant magical event Harry had previously witnessed. What happened was quieter and more invasive than that, a sensation that started at the base of his skull and moved downward, the feeling of something carefully and precisely being felt for, the way a doctor moves careful fingers along a bone to find the fracture. "I'm identifying the boundary layer," Hermione said, her voice very steady. "The fragment has an interface with your core, the point where Voldemort's soul attaches to your magical architecture. There it is, can you feel that?" "Yes," Harry said, cold and small and distinct. He'd been feeling it all week with the new Peverell perception, but now it was illuminated in a way it hadn't been before, the way a flashlight reveals a mark on a wall that daylight makes invisible. "That's it," she said. "Don't reach for it, don't push against it, just let me work. I'm not doing anything." "You're bracing," she said. "Your whole magical core is bracing, I can feel it." "Stop." He consciously stopped. It was harder than most things he'd done physically, which was saying something. Every instinct said protect, and what she needed was open, and those two things were not naturally compatible. He sat with the discomfort and breathed, and let the room's 800-year patience flow into him, and did what Hermione told him to do. The work took 40 minutes. He felt it in stages, the careful separation, the gradual loosening of something that had been anchored in him since he was 15 months old, the increasing sense that something was being distinguished from something else, the way a skilled hand can separate two fibers of silk that have been twisted together for decades. It hurt in the way surgery hurts when the anesthetic is working correctly, not agony, but a deep, insistent pressure, a wrongness that kept insisting on being noticed. Twice he said so as promised, and both times Hermione paused, adjusted her approach without comment, and continued. The adjustments helped immediately, which told him she'd already anticipated both complications and had solutions ready. "Almost," she said. He felt the fragment, small, cold, violently resistant now that it understood what was happening, try to pull back, try to find deeper purchase. It was unintelligent, but it was determined in the way all survival instincts are determined, purely mechanical, purely driven, and Hermione was more determined than it was. "Now," she said, and pulled. The word for what happened next was release. There was pain, sharp, complete, lasting exactly 3 seconds, and then there was the sensation of a door slamming shut on a cold draft. And then there was warmth, spreading from the center of his chest outward to his extremities, the warmth of a fire in a cold room, and Harry sat in it for a moment with his eyes closed and breathed. The 5th cold point on his internal map was gone. He opened his eyes. Hermione was standing in front of him with her hands still open and her face carrying the expression of intense concentration breaking into relief. And on the floor between them, flickering with a dim and ugly light that already had the quality of something dying, was a small shape, barely visible, formless, something like smoke given the suggestion of solidity. It was already fading. "Is that?" Harry started. "Yes," she said. "Don't touch it." "It's not," she searched for the word. "It's not coherent enough to be dangerous. It's just a fragment in the process of dispersing. It needs a few minutes." They watched it fade. It took less than 5 minutes, the light guttering and dying by stages, and then it was simply gone, and the floor was clean stone, and the chamber's ancient magic seemed to exhale. Hermione sat down on the floor abruptly, as if her legs had been holding the decision to sit for a while and had finally acted on it. Harry looked at her. Her hands were shaking very slightly, the fine tremor of someone who has been holding extraordinary precision for an extended period and has now released it. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." A pause. "That was the most technically demanding thing I've ever done. You didn't show it. I wasn't going to show it in front of you while I was doing it, Harry. That would have been counterproductive." "Are you actually fine?" She considered this with characteristic honesty. "I will be in about 20 minutes, she said. "Right now I'm slightly." She looked at her hands. "I used a lot." He reached out and took her hands, partly to check on the tremor, partly because it was what he wanted to do, which had been increasingly true about a number of things regarding Hermione recently and which he was aware of and had placed in the same mental folder as things to address when the world isn't ending. The tremor was already easing. 40 minutes, he said. "You held that for 40 minutes. 43, she said. "I was counting. Is that normal for this procedure?" "There's no baseline for normal. It's never been done before." She exhaled slowly. "I think 43 minutes for a fragment that had been seated for 15 years is actually quite fast." "Of course you're analyzing the time," Harry said. "I'm a data-driven person. You just removed a piece of Voldemort's soul from a living person, and your first instinct is to assess the efficiency metrics." "My first instinct was to make sure you were all right," she said. "That was the first instinct. The efficiency metrics are the second instinct." He hadn't let go of her hands. She hadn't moved to take them back. They sat on the floor of the 800-year-old chamber in the comfortable silence of two people who have just done something significant together and don't need to immediately narrate it. "Four left," Harry said after a while. "Four left," she confirmed. "Gringotts tomorrow. They left at 4 in the morning. Ron had wanted to come." Harry had expected the argument and had prepared for it, but when the moment arrived, Ron simply looked at both of them with his jaw set and his eyes clear and said, "Tell me why I shouldn't." "Because we need someone here who knows what we're doing," Harry said. "If something goes wrong at Gringotts, someone needs to be ready to move on the Ministry on Dumbledore to escalate properly. That's not a nothing role, Ron." Ron was quiet for a long moment. "That's not the whole reason," he said. "No," Harry admitted. "The whole reason is that Gringotts is extremely dangerous and this is a 4-person team with specific roles and I don't want to rework the approach at the last moment." "Those are two different reasons," Ron said. "Yes, the second one's honest at least." Ron exhaled. "Fine, but I want a status check by 8. If I don't hear anything by 8, I'm coming to Gringotts myself and I'll be loud about it." 8 o'clock, Harry confirmed. Luna was waiting at the castle's east gate, wearing robes that were so nondescript they functioned as a kind of camouflage. Nothing the eye wanted to stop on, nothing that called attention. She had a bag over her shoulder and a slightly dreamy expression that Harry now understood was not absence but a particular quality of relaxed watchfulness. The fourth member of the team was a surprise. Dobby appeared at Harry's left elbow at the edge of the grounds, made no sound whatsoever, and looked up at Harry with his enormous eyes expressing the particular Dobby brand of devoted, slightly terrified readiness. "Dobby is knowing what Harry Potter is doing today," Dobby said. "Dobby is wanting to help." Harry looked at Hermione, she looked at him. The exchange was fast. "Dobby," Harry said, "can you apparate into and out of the Gringotts vault levels?" "Dobby can go where wizards cannot," Dobby said, with the simple confidence of a being who has tested this empirically. "House elf magic is not the same as wizard magic. Gringotts wards are wizard wards." "Then you're our extraction route," Harry said. "If we need to leave the vault in a hurry, not the normal way, not through the bank, can you take us out?" "Dobby can take Harry Potter and Harry Potter's friends anywhere," Dobby said, and the certainty in it was complete and absolute and tremendously reassuring. "Right," Harry said. "You're in." The apparition to London was split. Hermione took Luna, Harry took Dobby, and they arrived in the pre-dawn quiet of Diagon Alley's back streets, the cobblestones still dark with damp, the early light just beginning to grey the edges of the sky. Gringotts stood at the end of Diagon Alley, the way it always stood, gleaming, white, imperturbable, with a quality of deliberate permanence that was both architectural and political. Hermione had prepared 2 sets of polyjuice, not for the thief's downfall as she'd explained to Ron, but for the goblin security stations before the deep vault levels, which operated on identity verification charms rather than the thief's downfall. The potion identities were 2 mid-level ministry officials whose vault access records showed regular visits to the high security level for legitimate estate management reasons. The profiles were impeccable. She'd sourced the hair samples through means that Harry had specifically decided not to ask about. The morning shift at Gringotts started at 5. They were in the queue at 5:02, looking by all available evidence, exactly like 2 ministry bureaucrats with early appointments, accompanied by 2 visitors whose lobby paperwork was in impeccable order. Luna's paperwork was specifically so impeccably ordinary that 2 separate goblins processed it without a single question, which was exactly the effect of impeccable ordinary paperwork at 5 in the morning. Dobby was invisible, which goblins apparently found unremarkable. The elf's magic was sufficiently different from wizard magic that the detection fields simply didn't register it. The goblin who had glanced at the space where Dobby wasn't had glanced with the entirely blank expression of someone who had seen nothing and processed it accordingly. The cart ride to Vault 711 was fast and steep and loud, the tracks rattling in the familiar roller coaster plunge, and Harry sat through it with his eyes open and his internal map focused on the cold point that was still somewhere ahead of them, the cup, anchored and waiting. The thief's downfall was at the junction before the high-security vaults. A waterfall of something that wasn't quite water, that stripped magic and disguise and enhancement, that would have undone polyjuice or glamour or any protective spell layered over natural appearance. It hit them exactly as Hermione had described. The ministry official appearances dissolved, the polyjuice running off them like rain off glass, and they stood in the torchlight of the deep vault level as themselves, Harry and Hermione and Luna a few paces back, all 3 of them revealed. The goblin cart driver, a very old goblin named Boggart who had the expression of someone who has seen everything and is prepared to be surprised by nothing, looked at them with eyes like ancient glass. "Mr. Potter," Boggart said. "Miss Granger, we need Vault 711, Harry said. "That vault belongs to Bellatrix Lestrange," Boggart said. "I know whose vault it is," Harry said. "I also know that the object inside it was placed there in violation of Gringotts' founding charter, Section 4, which prohibits the storage of soul-fragmented objects in bank vaults on the grounds that they corrupt the vault's magical integrity over time and constitute a hazard to Gringotts' own operations." He looked at Boggart steadily. "The cup has been there for 3 months. What's it done to the vault?" Bogrod was silent for a full 5 seconds, very long for a goblin. The containment integrity of Vault 711 has degraded by 17% since September, the goblin said, and his voice had shifted from the flat obstruction of official resistance into something more reluctant and more honest. 2 adjacent vaults have registered ambient contamination. Then you have an institutional interest in that cup being removed, Harry said. We can remove it. We can do so without touching anything else in the vault, without triggering the Gemino or Flagrante curses, and without causing any additional damage. He paused. Or we can leave it there and come back in 6 months when the contamination has spread further. Bogrod looked at him for another long moment. If you touch anything other than the cup, Bogrod said carefully, there is no agreement. There is no agreement, Harry confirmed. Nothing other than the cup, you have my word. Another pause. Then Bogrod turned the cart toward Vault 711, and they went. The vault opened to a key Bogrod produced from his own ring, not the Lestrange key, a Gringotts management key that existed for exactly this kind of charter violation situation. The door swung back with the particular sound of deep vault doors, heavy, layered, the sound of serious security, accepting that it has no objection today. Inside, the vault was vast and dark and piled with the Lestrange family wealth, and all of it was wrong in the way Hermione had described the seal being wrong, correct in shape, incorrect in substance. The Gemino curse on everything in the vault meant that touching anything would cause it to multiply, filling the space, burying them. The Flagrante curse meant the copies would burn. Harry could feel the cup before he saw it, the cold point close now, almost immediate. He walked toward it without using his eyes, following the Peverell perception, and found it in a pile of gold and silver objects near the far wall. A small golden cup with 2 handles and a badger engraved on the side, very pretty, radiating the wrongness of a fragmented soul. Don't touch the pile, Hermione said from behind him, and she was already raising her hands in the same open-palmed position she'd used in the ritual chamber. She performed the extraction in 4 minutes. 4 minutes compared to 43. The difference was that the cup had no living anchor point, no network of personal magic to navigate around. The fragment was seated in metal rather than flesh, which was simultaneously more straightforward and more violent. The extraction made the cup ring like a struck bell, a high wrong note, and the fragment dispersed in a flickering instant that was far less gradual than what had happened in the chamber. One moment it was there, cold and present. The next it was gone. The cup was just a cup. Hermione picked it up, turned it over. It's an artifact of genuine historical significance, she said quietly. It should go to a museum. She handed it to Harry, who wrapped it in the cloth they'd brought, and they walked out of the vault without touching another single thing. Bogrod watched them emerge. He looked at the wrapped cup, then at both of them. The charter violation is resolved, he asked. Resolved, Harry said. The adjacent vault contamination should clear in about a week. You might want to run integrity checks on Vault 710 specifically. That one will take the longest. Bogrod's expression, inscrutable as it was, shifted by some fraction of a degree towards something that might have been respect if it had been on a human face. The bank thanks Mr. Potter for his cooperation, he said, and it was the most diplomatic sentence Harry had ever heard from a goblin. Luna, who had spent the entire vault visit standing near the entrance with her arms folded, and her eyes moving continuously over the approach corridor in the way of someone watching for company, fell in beside them as they left. 2 goblins tried to contact the surface to check the identity of the cart riders, she said conversationally. I suggested to both of them that this could wait. How did you suggest that? Hermione asked. Luna showed them a small green stone on a cord around her wrist. It creates a mild conviction that whatever you were about to do can wait a few minutes. It's harmless and temporary. She tucked it back under her sleeve. Daddy gave it to me for situations where urgency is better than confrontation. I want to know everything your father has made, Hermione said. He'd love that, Luna said. He's a very enthusiastic sharer. The message came at 9:15 when they were back in the castle and Hermione was sitting in the library processing what had just happened with the systematic thoroughness she applied to significant events. The message was from Malfoy, delivered by a very small, very fast owl that landed on the library table, deposited its note and left before anyone could question it. She's gone. Andromeda's house. She's safe. B arrives at the manor this afternoon. Inner Circle meeting 2 p.m. He will be there. The third line made Harry's attention sharpen in a way that was almost physical. He will be there, Voldemort, at the manor this afternoon, which meant Nagini was at the manor. Harry, Hermione said, reading over his shoulder. I see it. This wasn't in the plan. No, Nagini is the last Horcrux besides the unknown item. If she's there this afternoon, I know. The manor is heavily warded. The Inner Circle will be present. Voldemort himself is there, and we have 3 hours. I know. She looked at him. He looked at her. The exchange this time was longer than usual, not disagreement, just the full weight of what was on the table being registered by both of them before any words were said about it. Malfoy's note says the meeting is at 2, she said. It's now 9:15. We have preparation time. The Slytherin seal is on Bellatrix. If she's at the manor at 2, both the seal and Nagini are in the same place. 2 Horcruxes in one location. Yes, Harry, she said carefully, going to Malfoy Manor today with minimal preparation to deal with 2 Horcruxes while the Inner Circle and Voldemort are present is, I know what it is, Harry said. Is it possible? She was quiet for a moment. The knowledge library was doing its work behind her eyes. Harry could see it, the rapid consultation, the assessment of known factors against available capabilities. The manor wards are keyed to the Malfoy bloodline and to Voldemort's own magic, she said slowly. They don't have a specific counter to Peverell-level magic because nobody who designed the wards would have considered it necessary. They're built against identified threats. She looked at him. We are not an identified threat yet. Yet, Harry said. Yes, after today that changes. She said it as a fact rather than a warning. If we go today we lose the element of not being understood. He'll recalibrate. He'll recalibrate anyway when the cup disappears from the vault. Not immediately. Gringotts won't notify Bellatrix right away. Charter violation procedure requires a formal notification process that takes 48 hours. We have a window. Harry folded the note carefully. If we wait for a better opportunity, there may not be one, she finished. With both of them there at the same time. Right, we'd need Dobby, she said, for extraction. Dobby's at Hogwarts, I can call him. Luna's in, and we're doing this in 5 hours. We're doing this in 5 hours, Harry confirmed. He looked at her. Tell me what you need. The library was very quiet around them. Through the windows the morning was grey and still, the kind of October morning that looks like it's waiting for something. Hermione opened a fresh piece of parchment and began writing quickly, the list of what they needed taking shape in her precise hand. We're not fighting our way in, she said as she wrote. We go in quiet, we go in specific, we get the targets and we leave, not a battle, a surgical operation. Agreed. If Voldemort engages us directly, we deal with that, Harry said. She looked up at him briefly. The look said that's not a plan. His look back said it's a contingency. He won't, she said, which was not confidence for confidence's sake but the knowledge library speaking. Not today. He'll want to understand us first. He'll try to observe, to assess. He won't commit to direct confrontation until he believes he has a decided advantage. She paused. And he won't believe that today. Because we'll be gone before he finishes deciding whether he has won. They arrived at the manor's outer boundary at 1:47. The boundary was invisible to most magical detection, a subtle thing, a pressure change, a slight wrongness in the air that most people would attribute to the afternoon and move on from. Harry felt it like a physical wall, the massive architectural magic of a property that had been warded by professional curse makers for 2 centuries. He walked through it. The wards read him, recognized the shape of him, tried the usual categorizations, threat, neutral, ally, and found that none of them quite fit what he was, and the slight delay of that confusion was all the time they needed. Hermione stepped through beside him. Luna beat behind, Dobby invisible somewhere near Harry's shoulder. The manor was visible at the end of a long approach, grey stone and large, and radiating the particular malevolence of a place that has housed very dark things for too long. The windows were mostly dark. 2 figures stood at the main entrance, not Death Eaters, security constructs, enchanted suits of armor that responded to authorization rather than thinking. They turned their heads toward the approaching figures, registered the Malfoy bloodline keying still active in the wards, and returned to forward-facing. The Malfoy wards still recognized the Malfoy blood. Hermione had suggested they might, given that the wards hadn't been updated since Lucius's arrest, a security gap that spoke to the disorganization of a household that had been effectively commandeered. They didn't use the entrance. They went in through a side window on the ground level that had a degraded ward seal. Hermione had spotted it from 20 meters out, a maintenance failure, the magical equivalent of a lock that hasn't been tested in years, and she dissolved it in approximately 8 seconds with the kind of casual precision that made it look like something anyone could do, which it absolutely wasn't. Inside, a long service corridor, cool and dark, smelling of stone and old wood and something chemical that Harry associated with the dark magic Hermione had described. The meeting was in the East Wing. Malfoy's note had been specific, which meant going right. They went right. Harry could feel both targets now close and distinct. The seal was moving slightly, the small-scale movement of a person gesturing or shifting their weight. Nagini was in or near the meeting room, stationary, coiled, the cold point of it solid and immediate. The corridor ended in a heavy door. Beyond it muffled the sound of voices, not the meeting, a side room adjacent to wherever the meeting was, occupied by 2 people. Harry pressed the Peverell perception outward, read the 2 magical signatures, identified them. Greyback and Yaxley, he murmured. Side room keeping watch. Can you deal with them quietly? Luna asked. Yes, Harry said. He opened the door. What followed took about 15 seconds. Greyback turned, saw him, started to reach for his wand, and Harry put him down with a stunner so precisely aimed and so powerfully delivered that the man was unconscious before he'd completed the motion. Yaxley managed to say 1 word, not a spell, just Potter, in a tone of complete disbelief, before Hermione's Silencio and Incarcerus hit him in such rapid succession they might as well have been 1 spell. She bound them both against the wall and put a confundus on the door that would make anyone who approached it from the corridor feel that there was nothing of interest behind it. 12 seconds, Luna said quietly. I had 13, Harry said. I was being generous, she said. Through the far wall, the voices in the meeting room continued without pause. They found Nagini through a connecting door, a large, dimly lit room off the main meeting space that served as a kind of antechamber. The snake was there, massive and still, coiled on a heated platform that had been set up specifically for her. She sensed Harry the moment he entered, her head rising, her tongue testing the air, the intelligence in her eyes as flat and measuring as a machine. "She'll alert him," Hermione said quietly. "I know," Harry said. "Be quick." Hermione moved. The extraction was immediate and brutal, not the careful surgery of the chamber or even the focused work in the vault, but something faster and harder, the kind of speed that trades subtlety for completion, and the trade was worth it. Nagini convulsed once, the soul fragment departing without ceremony, and then the snake lay still, not dead, just a snake, just an old and very large snake with no supernatural element, looking around the room with the suddenly ordinary eyes of something that has been freed of a possession it didn't know it was under. "Go," Hermione said. Harry was already moving. The seal, Bellatrix. He could feel it moving now, moving quickly, the person carrying it having sensed something, the meeting room erupting in the sounds of sudden alarm. Someone had felt the Horcruxes' destruction. Voldemort had felt it. The meeting room door burst open. Bellatrix Lestrange came through it at a run with her wand up and her eyes already wild. She had the quality of a person who runs toward disturbance rather than away from it, who has cultivated the instinct for confrontation over so many years it was simply her first motion now. She saw Harry. She stopped. "Potter," she breathed, and the word had 5 years of complicated darkness in it. "Bellatrix," Harry said. And then before she could speak another word, before the spell she was already assembling could complete its preparation, Harry reached out with the Peverell sense, found the seal on its chain around her neck, and pulled. Not physically. The action was entirely magical, the Peverell inherited knowledge of soul objects, the precise identification and targeted extraction. The seal came off its chain with a sound like a snapped cord and flew across the room and landed in his hand, and he crushed the soul fragment out of it the way you'd squeeze water from a cloth, direct, controlled, complete. The fragment dispersed in an instant. The seal was just gold, old gold, beautifully made, but just gold. Bellatrix stared at her empty chain with the expression of someone who has just had something amputated and hasn't processed it yet. "You," she started. "Dobby," Harry said. The air cracked. They were in the library at Hogwarts. All 4 of them, Dobby included, the manor replaced by the familiar smell of old parchment and the early afternoon light through the tall windows. Harry had the seal in his fist, and the cold map in his head had 4 points marked resolved, and somewhere in the southeast of England Voldemort was standing in a room where the Nagina point had just gone dark and working out what it meant. Luna sat down in the nearest chair with the smooth movement of someone who has been holding a great deal of alertness and is now allowing herself to release it. "That was 11 minutes, she said. "How are you keeping exact time in these situations?" Hermione asked. "I count," Luna said. "It's soothing." Dobby was vibrating slightly with the aftermath of the long-distance jump, his large ears flat with effort. Harry knelt beside him. "You all right?" "Dobby is very all right," Dobby said in the tone of someone who would say this in any condition. Dobby helped. Dobby was essential, Harry said, which was true, and Dobby made a sound like a very small engine discovering it had been given high-quality fuel. Harry set the seal on the table, one remaining target, the diadem, room of requirement, the simplest geography on the list, the most accessible, the most straightforward. He looked at Hermione. She was slightly pale, the cumulative toll of the extractions showing in the set of her eyes, the careful way she was managing her breathing. "Tomorrow," he said, "the diadem tomorrow." She looked like she was going to argue, then she looked at her hands, steady, not trembling, but the steadiness of deliberate control. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Ron appeared in the library doorway with a look of relief so profound it had restructured his face. "It's 2:10, he said. "You were supposed to check in at 8. Things developed quickly, Harry said. Ron looked at the seal on the table, looked at all of them, looked at the specific quality of Hermione's careful breathing and Luna's seated exhaustion and Dobby's vibrating readiness and Harry's entirely calm exterior. "How many?" Ron said. 4, Harry said. "As of today, 4, Ron exhaled. He sat down in the chair next to Luna's, the solid, reliable drop of someone who has been standing by for hours and finally gets to put the weight down. "1 left, Ron said. 1 left, Harry confirmed. Outside, somewhere in the grey October afternoon, a great intelligence was sitting very still in the wreckage of 4 destroyed anchor points, and thinking and planning and not panicking, because Tom Riddle had never panicked and never would, but beginning, for perhaps the first time in his long, careful life, to feel the approach of something he had spent every year since his 16th birthday working to avoid. The end of the road. It was closer than it had ever been. Chapter 5, The True Death. The diadem took 4 minutes. Harry and Hermione walked into the room of requirement at 7 in the morning, found it configured as the room of hidden things, the vast cathedral-ceilinged space packed with centuries of discarded objects, towering piles of furniture and broken equipment and things people had hidden and forgotten, and moved through it with the Peverell perception guiding them like a compass needle. The diadem was on a stone bust near the back, exactly where it had always been, the sole fragment in it radiating its particular cold signature as clearly as a fire in a dark field. Hermione extracted it standing. didn't sit down, didn't need the full preparation of the ritual chamber, just raised her hands and worked with the focused efficiency of someone who had now done this 4 times and understood the mechanics in a way that had moved from knowledge into muscle memory. The fragment dispersed. The diadem clattered softly off the bust. Harry picked it up, turned it over. A beautiful thing, genuinely, the delicate metalwork of it, the sapphire set in the center, the inscription running around the inner band in a script the knowledge library told him meant wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure. He set it down carefully. 5, Hermione said. 5, Harry confirmed. They stood in the dusty quiet of the room of hidden things for a moment. 5 Horcruxes destroyed. Cold map in Harry's internal perception was clear in every direction now, no anchor points, no fragments, nothing but the world's own ordinary ambient magic. Voldemort was mortal. For the first time in 50 years, Tom Riddle was mortal. He knows, Harry said. He's known since the manor, Hermione said. He would have felt the Nagini loss immediately. The others, the cup and the seal, maybe 6 hours after when the absence finally registered. The diadem he'll feel now. She paused. Been processing this for roughly 40 hours. What does 40 hours of processing look like for him? She thought. Controlled escalation. He won't scatter, he won't make disorganized moves. He'll identify what he's lost, assess what remains, and build a new strategy around it. She looked at Harry. And the new strategy will be simple because the only variable that matters now is you. Without the Horcruxes, he can't ignore the prophecy anymore. He has to end it one way or the other. He's coming here? Yes, Harry nodded. He'd known this since the manor, the same way he'd known things all week, not through anxiety or dread, but through the clear, unembellished reading of the situation that the Peverell clarity made possible. Voldemort was mortal and cornered and intelligent, and a mortal, cornered, intelligent man attacked, especially one who had spent his whole life confusing aggression with strength. When? Harry asked. Soon, Hermione said. He won't wait. Waiting now works against him. Every hour we have is an hour where we might do something else he didn't predict. He'll come while he still believes he has an advantage we're not aware of. Does he have one? She looked at him steadily. No. Then let him come, Harry said. They told Dumbledore over breakfast. Not in the headmaster's office, at the staff table, sitting beside him, speaking quietly while the great hall filled with the morning noise of students and the smell of toast and the grey October light doing its best through the high windows. Dumbledore listened without interrupting again, which had become his mode with them since the night the ministry had visited. And when Harry finished, 5 Horcruxes gone, Voldemort fully mortal, a direct engagement imminent, the headmaster was quiet for a long moment. The prophecy, Dumbledore said. I know what it says, Harry said. Neither can live while the other survives. I've known the full version since 5th year. I worked out the mechanism on the walk back from the ritual chamber. He picked up his tea. Voldemort marked me as his equal when he chose me over Neville. That choice bound the prophecy to us specifically. What I didn't understand before, what the Peverell legacy clarified, is that the prophecy isn't a prediction, it's a description. It's describing a magical reality, not forecasting an outcome. The reality is that his magic and mine have been in opposition since he gave me this scar, and that opposition has to resolve. One of us stops. And you're prepared for that, Dumbledore said. I've been prepared for it since I was 15, Harry said. I'm just better equipped now. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, over his half-moon glasses, with an expression that had traveled a considerable distance since the night Harry had walked into this office and demanded honesty. It was the look of a man who had spent decades managing a situation and was finding in its final chapter that the person he'd been managing had outgrown the management so completely that the only appropriate response was to get out of the way and watch. What do you need from me? Dumbledore asked. The castle, Harry said. I need it prepared, not evacuated. I don't think the confrontation will be here, but if Voldemort comes to Hogwarts, we need the wards at full capacity, and I need the Order positioned to keep his Death Eaters out of the grounds while the main engagement happens. Where do you think it will be? Harry had been thinking about this since the previous afternoon, the Peverell knowledge and his own instinct turning the question over. Voldemort would choose the location if he could, would choose something with symbolic weight, because he was a man who understood the importance of narrative, who had always staged his power through symbolism. A place with meaning, a place that represented something. Godric's Hollow, Harry said. The table went very quiet around them, the small private quiet of a significant word landing in a space where people were paying attention. He'll go there, Harry continued, because it's where he failed. He'll want to reclaim it, not literally, but in his own mind. It's unfinished business and he knows it. He'll expect me to avoid it for emotional reasons. He set down his tea. So we go there first, when? Dumbledore asked. Today, Harry said. Hermione spent the morning in the library while Harry walked the grounds. Not aimlessly, he had specific things to do on the grounds, specific conversations, specific preparations, but the walking itself had a purpose too. He was learning the castle in the new way, reading the deep architectural magic of it, the wards that Dumbledore had built over decades layered over the original founder's construction, the places where the magic was thickest and the places where it was maintained more thinly. He was learning where the vulnerabilities were so he could tell the Order where to stand. McGonagall found him at the edge of the lake, looking across the water at the opposite bank where the forbidden forest began. She stood beside him for a moment without speaking, which was McGonagall's way of respecting that a person might need a moment before conversation. You're going today, she said. This afternoon, Harry confirmed. Is there anything I should know about the state of you? She said it in the precise, direct way she had that was somehow warmer than most people's gentleness. Medically, magically, otherwise. I had a piece of Voldemort's soul removed from my head 3 days ago, Harry said. I feel better than I have since I was 15 months old. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. I've been a teacher for a very long time, she said. I've watched a great many students face a great many things. I have never, she paused, and for McGonagall that pause was enormous. I have never watched any of them face what you have faced with the self-possession you have consistently demonstrated. This week more than any other. She looked at the lake. I want you to know that I have always seen it. I should have said so sooner. Harry looked at her. McGonagall's face was doing very little. She was, after all, McGonagall, but the doing very little was of the particular kind that meant something was happening underneath it that wasn't going to make it to the surface, and Harry understood that and found that the understanding was enough. Thank you, he said. He nodded once, the small precise nod of a thing properly said and received, and walked back toward the castle. Ron was waiting by the boathouse at 10. He'd heard from Harry that morning that they were going, and he'd arrived at the boathouse with a directness and a look on his face that had resolved all the complicated processing of the past week into something simpler and more fundamental. I'm coming, Ron said. Harry looked at him. Not an argument, Ron said. Not a negotiation, I'm coming. Harry held his gaze. Ron's eyes were clear and steady, and the set of his jaw was the particular Ronish stubbornness that was rooted not in self-interest but in the oldest and most reliable thing about him, the instinct toward being present for the people he loved when it mattered. If I say no, Harry said. I go anyway, Ron said, but I'd rather go with your blessing than without it. You know it might not. I know, Ron said. There are no guarantees about how. Harry, Ron said. Mate. I know, I've known since first year I'm coming, Harry breathed. The lake moved quietly behind them, the October breeze riffling its surface. He thought about every moment Ron had been there, chess pieces and broken legs and spiders and brains and everything between, and he thought about what the world would look like if he tried to walk toward this without him. You're coming, Harry said. Ron exhaled. Good, he said. Hermione made me a list of what to pack. I've had it ready since yesterday. She made you a list. She made everyone a list. Luna has a list. I have a list. Dobby has a list, which is impressive given that Dobby doesn't carry anything. What's on Dobby's list? Mostly locations and emergency extraction points. Ron fell into step beside him. She's very thorough. I know, Harry said. They left at 2 in the afternoon. 5 of them, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Luna, Dobby, and the particular quality of the afternoon light was sharp and cold. The sky a clean hard blue with the sun low and bright, the kind of afternoon that feels very awake. They apparated in sequence, Dobby last, to the edge of Godric's Hollow, and landed in the quiet of a small English village that smelled of wood smoke and damp leaves and looked entirely like itself. The village was still. Not the suspicious stillness of a place that knows it's being watched, just the ordinary mid-afternoon quiet of a small place where most people were inside or at work. A cat crossed the lane, somewhere a door closed. The church tower stood at the village's heart, and the graveyard beside it held its particular weight of years. Harry had been here once, on Christmas Eve in a previous year, and that visit had been snow and grief and the cold horror of the graveyard and Voldemort's snake in the body of an old woman. Today the village looked smaller somehow and more ordinary, and the graveyard when they passed it seemed simply a graveyard, a place where people were buried, where stones recorded names and dates, where the grass grew over everything with the democratic persistence of all grass everywhere. He paused at his parents' grave. Not for long, a moment, a breath, a looking, and then he moved on because the point of this visit was not grief, and he thought his parents would understand that. The cottage was at the end of a lane. It had been rebuilt partially since the night of October 31st, 1981, the structural repair incomplete, the top floor still showing the damage, preserved by some collective wizarding impulse toward memorial, warded against Muggle sight. Harry looked at it with the new perception and felt it the way he felt old places now, the density of old magic, the deep layers of a site that had accumulated significance. He also felt something else. He's been here, Hermione said, standing beside him, reading the same thing. Recently, in the last 12 hours. Left a marker, Harry said. He could feel it, subtle, sophisticated, the mark of a very powerful wizard laying a trace on a location. Not a trap exactly, a claim. A declaration of intent. I was here, I'm coming back. He wants you to know, Luna said. He wants me to be here, Harry said. He wants me to come to this place specifically. He thinks it gives him something. Emotional vulnerability, Hermione said. He thinks you'll be compromised here. He's been thinking that my emotions are a vulnerability since I was 1 year old, Harry said. He's been wrong about it the whole time. They went inside. The cottage's ground floor was largely intact, the repaired sections blending into the older structure with the awkward seam of forced reconstruction. It smelled of stone and wood and something else, a faint, chemical wrongness that was old dark magic slowly dissipating over decades, the residue of the killing curse's impact on the building itself. Harry stood in the small entrance hallway and let the Peverell sense read the space, and what it told him was that this was a place where 2 specific magical events had happened, a death and a deflection, and the echo of both was still here, layered into the walls, and the deflection echo was his. This is where it bounced back, he said. Yes, Hermione said quietly, I can feel it. He stood with it for a moment. The echo of a 15-month-old's accidental protection, the love magic of a mother's sacrifice encoded into the stone, still legible, still somehow present. He felt it the way you feel the warmth of a fire that's been out for hours, the heat remaining in the structure of the thing. She's still here in a way. Nobody said anything. Harry put his hand flat against the wall and held it there for 3 seconds. Then he straightened. Positions, he said, the same as we discussed. Ron and Luna on the perimeter. I want early warning on any approach, magical or otherwise. Dobby holds the extraction point. Hermione and I inside. If he brings people with him, Ron said. He won't, Harry said. Not for this, he'll come alone. He looked at them all, Ron with his wand already out, Luna with her steady eyes and her small green stone and her particular quality of entirely fearless attention, Dobby with his enormous ears flat and his whole small body radiating readiness. He looked at Hermione, who was watching him with an expression that had resolved through the week into something clear and direct and settled. I want everyone to know, in case this is the last time I say it clearly, that you are all extraordinary. Every one of you. Don't make it a farewell speech, Hermione said. It's not a farewell speech, it's a current assessment. Harry, she said his name with the particular weight she gave it when she needed his full attention, the 2 syllables carrying more than 2 syllables usually carried. Come back. That's always been the plan, he said. She held his gaze for a beat, then she nodded. They spread out. Ron took the north approach, Luna the south, Dobby invisible and everywhere at once in the way of house elf magic. Harry and Hermione moved into the cottage's main room, the low-ceilinged sitting room with its repaired walls and its old fireplace and its view through the front window onto the quiet lane. They waited. He came at dusk. Harry felt him before he saw him, the sensation of the Peverell sense encountering something massive and cold, not fragmented anymore, not diluted across multiple anchor points but concentrated into a single presence. The full weight of Voldemort's magic, everything he was, undivided and whole and terribly powerful, moving down the lane toward the cottage with the deliberate, unhurried pace of absolute certainty. The door opened without being touched. Voldemort was taller in person than the Horcrux nightmares had suggested, and the physical reality of him, the white face, the flat scarlet eyes, the quality of wrongness that radiated from him like heat from a different kind of fire, was something that Harry had seen before in contexts of fear and crisis, and had never quite registered in the way he registered it now, which was as simply data. A person, a very dangerous person, a person who was going to be dealt with today. Voldemort looked at Harry and the recognition in his eyes was mutual and ancient and utterly without surprise. He looked at Hermione. Something crossed his face, not the contempt of old, but something more considered. Recalibrating as she had predicted, taking in the new information. You've been busy, Voldemort said. His voice was the same as Harry had always remembered it, high and cold, and carrying the particular quality of a voice that has never had to compete for attention, that has always simply expected silence. Yes, Harry said. 5, Voldemort said. An impressive pace. I underestimated the timeline. A pause. I did not underestimate you. I want you to know that. I have never underestimated you. I underestimated the inheritance. I had no information that a joint recognition was possible. You do, Harry said. Indeed. Voldemort's eyes moved to Hermione again. Miss Granger, you performed the extractions. Yes, Hermione said. Her voice was steady and clear, the voice she used when she was answering a question in class, present, direct, without apology. Remarkable, Voldemort said, and the word was entirely genuine, which was somehow worse than contempt would have been. The soul extraction methodology was lost for 6 centuries. You reconstructed it in 3 days. He tilted his head slightly. It is a shame about the side you chose. Is it, Hermione said, not a question. The Peverell legacy aligning with Muggle-born and half-blood heirs rather than those with the lineage to properly. Tom, Harry said. Voldemort stopped. The name in the room was like a struck match, small, immediate, lighting something. I've been doing something you might find interesting, Harry continued, his voice conversational as if they were discussing a lesson. I've been reading about you. The actual record, not the myth, not the legend, not the symbol. The person. Tom Marvolo Riddle, born 1926 in a Muggle orphanage in London, mother dead, father absent, grew up without magic being explained to him, came to Hogwarts with exactly as much context for the wizarding world as I had, and spent the next 70 years building the most elaborate defense mechanism any frightened person has ever constructed. Something flickered in the scarlet eyes. Not anger, Harry had expected anger, something more dangerous than that. The flicker of a thing that had been buried so long and so deep that being named was physically intrusive. You think you know me, Voldemort said. I think you were afraid, Harry said. And I think everything you've ever done came from that. The Horcruxes, the followers, the name you made everyone afraid to say, all of it is the architecture of a person who was terrified of dying and decided that terror was easier to live with if you made everyone else terrified too. He paused. I understand it better than you'd like. I was 11 years old and famous for surviving something I couldn't remember and scared every single day. The difference is I had people. He looked at Voldemort steadily. You decided people were the weakness. You had it exactly backwards. Voldemort raised his wand. The killing curse came fast, faster than Harry had ever seen it cast, the green light filling the room in an instant, aimed with the perfect accuracy of a wizard who had cast this spell hundreds of times and had never once missed. Harry didn't dodge. He had known this moment was coming since the corridor 3 days ago, since Ignotus Peverell had put a hand on his shoulder in a space that was neither here nor anywhere. He had known it with the certainty of the Peverell clarity, that deep legibility the legacy had given him, the full understanding of what death was and wasn't, what the curse required and what it couldn't have. He let the curse hit him. The impact was light, not painless, not nothing, but light in the way that the word light means both illumination and the absence of weight, both of those at once. The green fire washed through him and found the thing it was looking for, the living anchor, the piece of the caster that had been embedded in the target at the original casting and that a killing curse required to do its work, and found nothing. No fragment, no anchor, clean, the curse dispersed. Harry was standing. The expression on Voldemort's face was something Harry had no catalogue for, because it was the expression of a man encountering the impossible and understanding immediately and completely what it meant. No fragment, no anchor. The curse that had defined both their lives, the curse that had started everything, couldn't touch him now because the piece it needed as its purchase point had been removed 4 days ago in a stone chamber 800 years old. You destroyed it, Voldemort said, and the high cold voice was entirely different now, stripped of its performance quality, just a voice, a man's voice, the fragment, the anchor. 3 days ago, Harry said. Hermione extracted it. Then the curse can't kill me, Harry said. Not like that, not anymore. He raised his own wand. But it can still kill you. Voldemort moved. He was extraordinary, genuinely extraordinary, the raw power of him enormous and his speed beyond anything human, casting and moving simultaneously, the suite of offensive spells that had ended more lives than Harry could count deployed with a fluid, continuous precision. The room erupted, the fireplace exploded, the repaired walls cracked, the window blew in. Harry and Hermione moved together. Not in the coordinated way of a rehearsed strategy, better than that, the instinctive way of two people whose magical signatures were so fluent with each other they functioned as a single operational intelligence. She was covering his angles before he registered the angle needed covering. He was deflecting the rebounds of her shields before she thought to ask. They moved through the cottage under Voldemort's assault the way the two of them moved through everything together, specifically, without needing to confirm it. Voldemort felt it. Harry could see him feel it, the adjustment, the adaptation, the realization that two targets operating as one was a different mathematical problem than two targets operating separately. He shifted tactics immediately, which was the mark of a brilliant combatant, beginning to work on separating them, driving wedges of fire and concussive spellwork between their positions. It didn't work. They'd been in situations that tried to separate them since they were 12 years old. They had a response to it that was older than strategy and more reliable than training. Harry pressed forward. Not cautiously, not tentatively, directly, the way the Peverell clarity said forward, reading Voldemort's magic the way you read text, each spell's preparation visible a half-second before its completion, the tells in the wand movement, the tells in the body, the slight lean that preceded a killing curse, the shoulder rotation that meant a concussive blast. He was faster than Voldemort expected. Not faster in raw terms, Voldemort's speed was extraordinary, but faster in the specific way of someone who is reading rather than reacting, who is already answering the question before it finishes being asked. He deflected 3 killing curses in rapid sequence, not by dodging Expelliarmus, meeting each one with a targeted counter that disrupted the curse mid-flight, a technique the knowledge library had given him that nobody had deployed in 3 centuries, and each one dispersed, and he kept moving, and Voldemort kept adjusting, and the cottage was being slowly destroyed around them. The wand, Hermione said from his left, and he heard the knowledge library in her voice. She'd accessed something. Tell me, Harry said, deflecting, moving. He's using the Elder Wand, she said, which means the wand knows you. Harry understood immediately. The allegiance transferred at the end of 6th year when I disarmed Dumbledore. The wand has been his physically since Dumbledore's death, she said, blocking a concussive blast with both hands, the Peverell magic absorbing it entirely. But the allegiance never transferred because Dumbledore arranged his own death. The wand passed to Draco Malfoy at Dumbledore's disarming. You took Malfoy's wand. She paused. The Elder Wand's true master right now is you. Voldemort turned toward Hermione as she said it, the recognition of dangerous information in his eyes, and raised the wand. Harry stepped between them. He held out his hand toward Voldemort, not a threatening gesture, just an open hand, and said very clearly, "Give me the wand." The Elder Wand exploded out of Voldemort's grip, not a Keo. Not a summoning charm, the wand simply went, crossed the room in the time it takes to blink, responding to the pull of its own allegiance, and landed in Harry's hand. The room went entirely still. Voldemort stood without his wand. The silence was complete. Harry looked at the Elder Wand in his hand. It was warm. It felt wrong in the particular way of something made with a wrong intention. Powerful, yes, extraordinary, yes, but constructed around dominance rather than alignment, and dominance was not something he needed. He looked at Voldemort across the ruined room, and Voldemort looked back, and in the scarlet eyes Harry saw finally for the first time the thing underneath, the thing that had always been underneath, that the Peverell clarity made visible the way a flashlight makes visible the mark on the wall. Fear, raw and old and completely unresolved. The fear of a child who had never been given a reason to believe the world was survivable and had spent 7 decades making it unsurvivable for everyone else as a consequence. I'm going to offer you something, Harry said, not because I have to, because it's the right thing to offer. Voldemort was perfectly still. Surrender, Harry said, not to me, to the fact that this is over. The Horcruxes are gone, the wand is gone, the war is over. People will stop dying. You'll face what you've done, all of it, but you'll face it as a mortal man with a trial and a record and a verdict, not as a symbol that outlives its destruction and becomes something worse. He paused. Tom Riddle walking into a courtroom is the end of this. Lord Voldemort dying here becomes a story someone tells in 100 years to justify the next war. Voldemort looked at him for a long moment. Harry genuinely didn't know what he was going to say. He thought that some part of the person buried underneath the architecture might hear it. He thought the offer was real and that he meant it. He had never wanted to be a killer and he had never wanted a martyr. No, Voldemort said, not with heat, not with the theatrical contempt of the villain in a story. Just no, flat and final and entirely himself. The choice of a person who has been making the same choice since they were 16 years old and had no mechanism left for making a different one. All right, Harry said. He raised his own wand, not the elder wand, his own 11 inches holly phoenix feather, the twin to the wand in Voldemort's hand that he no longer had, and cast the one spell he had carried since his defense lessons, the one spell that had always been his. Expelliarmus, Harry said. The spell hit Voldemort's wandless shield, and the shield simply wasn't enough, because the elder wand was in Harry's hand and it recognized its master, and it put everything it had into a disarming charm, which was somewhat like using a Formula One engine to start a lawnmower. And what happened to the shield was not deflection but erasure. Voldemort was thrown backward. He hit the cottage wall and slid down it, and the magic that Harry had felt all week as cold and present and overwhelming simply stopped generating. Tom Riddle was mortal and he had taken an injury that a mortal man couldn't sustain, and the magic that had kept him alive through every previous defeat, every resurrection, every recovery wasn't there to pull him back. He was breathing, shallow and slow but breathing. Harry crossed the room and knelt beside him. He didn't know exactly why. It felt right in the way that things felt right now, the instinct of the Peverell clarity operating below the level of explicit reasoning. Voldemort's eyes opened. The scarlet had dimmed, they were darker now, the inhuman quality bleeding away as the magic that had sustained it faded. You could have been extraordinary, Voldemort said. His voice was almost conversational. Either of you, with the right, with different, we are extraordinary, Harry said quietly. We chose to be something you never managed to be, and it turns out that was the deciding factor. Voldemort looked at him, and Harry looked back, and whatever was in the look passed between them in the way of two people who have been entangled since before memory. Then Voldemort closed his eyes. When he opened them again, something had gone, the presence of him, the full weight of it, and what was left was an old man lying on the floor of a cottage in a small English village, breathing carefully, alive, mortal, finished. Hermione came and stood beside Harry. She looked down and then at Harry, and the look between them was long and complete and contained everything about the week and about the years before it, the whole accumulated weight of everything they had moved through together to arrive in this specific moment. Is he? Ron's voice from the doorway. Alive, Harry said. Unconscious, he needs medical attention. He stood. Get Dumbledore, get Bones, get everyone. He looked at the cottage around him, the ruined walls, the blown window, the deep dark of the evening coming in from outside. This is over. Ron made a sound. Harry thought it might have been a laugh and might have been a sob and was probably both. Luna appeared in the doorway beside Ron and looked at the scene with her characteristic evenness. Good, she said. Dobby materialized at Harry's feet and looked up at him with enormous eyes. Is Harry Potter all right? Dobby asked. Yes, Harry said. And then, because Dobby deserved precision, yes, Dobby, I'm really all right. Dobby made the small engine sound again, and Harry reached down and put a hand briefly on his head, and Dobby held perfectly still with the expression of something that has been given more than it expected. Outside, the last of the October sun was dropping below the village rooftops, and the sky above Godric's Hollow was going from gold to dark in the way of autumn evenings, quickly the daylight folding itself away. Stars appeared, the church bell somewhere in the village struck 6, the sound carrying across the quiet in the way sound carries on cold evenings. Hermione was standing at the blown-out window looking at the sky. Harry went and stood beside her, and they stood there together in the cooling air, and the night came in. Are you actually all right? She said. The killing curse hit me, he said. I know, and he thought about it, took it seriously because she was asking seriously. It felt like being told no, he said. The curse looked for the thing it needed to do its work and found nothing there, and so it just said no and left. She looked at him. The expression on her face was complicated in a way that all the precision and knowledge library and tactical clarity in the world couldn't fully contain. It was complicated in the specifically human way of someone who has been afraid for a person and has now received relief and is discovering that relief is its own overwhelming thing. Hermione, Harry said. Don't, she said. I wasn't going to say anything sentimental. You were absolutely going to say something sentimental. I was going to say that you saved my life. That's a fact, not a sentiment. You saved mine at the manor. I stepped in front of a wand. You removed a soul fragment from a living person. Those are not equivalent. She turned toward him. In the ruined cottage in the fading light she looked herself, entirely herself, every part of her present and accounted for. The precision and the warmth and the terrifying intelligence and the humanness of her, all of it. What do we do now? She said. First, Harry said, we wait for Dumbledore and the Order and about 100 complicated institutional processes to begin. Then we deal with those. Then, after all of that, he looked at her, she looked at him. I have some thoughts about after, Harry said. So do I, she said. Are they the same thoughts? She considered him for a moment. The specific, thoughtful, assessing look she gave to problems she was genuinely interested in solving. And then she said, yes. Behind them, Ron was talking to Dobby in the low, easy tone he used when he was managing his own emotions by being useful to someone. Luna was sitting on the low windowsill of the side window that hadn't blown out, watching the stars appear with her usual undisturbed attention. The sky above Godric's Hollow was fully dark now, clear and cold and enormous, and Harry stood in it with Hermione beside him and felt, for the first time in his memory, not just this week, not just this year, but in his entire memory, the particular quality of a world that wasn't waiting for something terrible to happen. Just the world, just the night, just this. The church bell struck the half hour and the stars kept appearing, and somewhere in the dark lane outside the Order of the Phoenix was arriving, and it was all beginning, the complicated, enormous aftermath, but the thing itself, the thing that had been coming since before he was born, was over. It was over. Chapter 6. After the inheritance, the first 3 days were chaos, which Harry had expected, and the chaos was entirely manageable, which he hadn't. The Order arrived at Godric's Hollow within 20 minutes of Ron's message. Dumbledore first, then Moody, then Tonks and her mother Andromeda, and Andromeda came with Narcissa Malfoy standing slightly behind her with the expression of someone who has been given unexpected shelter and hasn't yet decided whether to trust it. Behind them came a wave of auras that Bones had mobilized from the new DMLE structure, and behind the auras came the news, spreading through the wizarding world in the particular accelerated way that things spread when they are enormous and true. Voldemort Tom Riddle was alive, in custody, unconscious, being transporting to St. Mungo's under the heaviest magical restraint the Ministry possessed. Harry had insisted on the alive part. He'd had approximately 4 separate arguments about it in the first hour after the cottage, and he'd won all 4 without raising his voice, which was a new experience for everyone involved, including himself. The arguments varied in their specifics. Moody wanted a permanent solution. A Ministry official whose name Harry didn't know wanted something that precluded a trial, and 2 auras had the particular blank competence of people who had been given a mandate that Harry was simply declining to honor, but they all amounted to the same thing. A request for a convenient death, for the story to end cleanly, for the symbol to be properly extinguished. A trial, Harry said each time with the same inflection and the same finality. He faces a Wisengamot. He faces the record of what he did in public with witnesses. He doesn't become a martyr or a mystery. He becomes accountable. And each time the argument ran out of road because Harry was the reason any of them were standing here tonight, and he was not particularly interested in debate on the point. Hermione handled the documentation, the formal chain of custody for Tom Riddle's person, the magical restraint specifications, the preliminary evidence catalogue. She produced a quill and parchment from her bag and wrote with a focused efficiency that most of the arriving officials found slightly unnerving, and what she wrote was so precisely legally correct that the Ministry's own compliance wizard, arriving with the second wave, read it over and made exactly 2 small amendments before signing it. Ron kept people out of the cottage itself. This was not glamorous work, and he did it without complaint, standing in the doorway with the particular quality of pleasant immovability he'd developed over years of being a tall, broad-shouldered Weasley, redirecting traffic, managing questions, sending people to the correct person with the accuracy of someone who had been watching Harry and Hermione's organizational patterns for long enough to internalize them. Luna sat on the garden wall and talked to Andromeda Tonks, and whatever she said made Andromeda laugh once, a short, surprised laugh, the laugh of someone who hadn't expected to laugh tonight and then lean in with genuine attention. At some point in the managed chaos of the first hour, Harry found a moment of actual quiet. He was standing at the edge of the lane while a Ministry medical team moved around him, and he pressed the Peverell perception outward in the way he'd been doing all week, the instinctive scan checking the map. The map was clear, no cold points, no fragments, nothing but the world's own ambient magic, the soft background hum of a living place going about its business. He held that for a moment, really held it, let it register fully, and then he let it go and went back to work. The trial was set for the 15th of November. In the 4 weeks between Godric's Hollow and the Wisengamot, the wizarding world did what worlds do when something enormous and impossible has happened. It processed, it argued, it generated an extraordinary volume of opinion. It was wrong about most things and right about a few, and it slowly, resistingly began to adjust. The Daily Prophet ran 7 front-page stories in the first week, which was approximately 6 more than it had managed with accuracy during the previous year. Hermione read each one with the attentiveness of a scholar reviewing papers, noting the errors with the margin annotation reflex she'd never quite suppressed, and occasionally reading passages aloud to Harry in a tone that indicated she was deciding whether to write a corrective letter. She wrote 3. All 3 were published, which surprised her and didn't surprise Harry at all. The letters she received in response were interesting. They came from everywhere, from students at Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, from magical families in 12 countries, from historians and scholars and elderly witches who had survived the First War and wanted her to know things she might not know yet. She read all of them. She answered many of them. She kept a specific folder for the ones that contained useful information, which ended up being fairly thick. Harry received letters too. He answered few of them and felt only slightly guilty about this. The Peverell recognition had become, in the public understanding, something between a legend and a news story, and the public understanding was as usual approximately 40% accurate. What people got right was that something fundamental had shifted. What they got wrong was almost everything about what it meant. The Prophet ran a piece suggesting Harry and Hermione would be founding some kind of new wizarding order with themselves at the head of it, which Harry read, set down, and said absolutely not to with such completeness that Hermione folded the paper away without comment. What they were actually doing was considerably less dramatic and considerably more work. Dumbledore called it the Reconstruction Conversations, which was the kind of name only Dumbledore would give to what were essentially a series of very long, very productive arguments. They happened in the Hogwarts staff room, which was cramped and slightly too warm and smelled of old wood and decades of teachers' tea, and they happened 3 times a week for the 4 weeks before the trial. The participants shifted. Sometimes it was just Harry, Hermione, and Dumbledore. Sometimes Bones joined them, and her presence had the quality of fresh air entering a room that had been closed too long, the direct, unglamoured intelligence of a woman who had spent years being underestimated and was entirely finished with it. Lupin came once a week, and contributed the particular perspective of someone who had lived on the margins of both worlds. McGonagall attended every session and said things approximately twice per session, but the things she said had a decisive quality that tended to resolve whatever had been unresolved. The conversations were about structure, about what needed to change and how, and in what order. Muggleborn registration, already being assembled by Yaxley and Runcorn before the war ended, a shadow of legislation waiting in ministry corridors, was formally prohibited. The statute burned before it could be implemented, and 3 additional protective measures were added to the Muggleborn Integration Charter that had existed since the 1970s and been steadily defunded. Hermione wrote most of those measures. She was very specific about them in a way that made them very difficult to quietly circumvent later, which was deliberate. The Dementor question was harder. Harry had views on Dementors. He'd had them since he was 13 years old, and the Peverell clarity had only sharpened them into something less like personal distaste and more like a clear philosophical position. Dementors were not tools. The use of soul-attacking creatures as prison guards was a choice, not a necessity, and the fact that it had been the choice for centuries didn't make it a defensible one. This argument took the better part of 2 full sessions, and Harry won it narrowly, partly through the force of the position and partly because Bones had done a study in her early Auror years about the psychological aftermath of Azkaban imprisonment on people who were subsequently found innocent, and the study made things very clear very quickly. The Dementors were removed from Azkaban in the 3rd week of November. Where they went, Harry didn't precisely know. Away from places with people was the important part. The Hogwarts curriculum was Hermione's project, and she approached it with the focused, slightly territorial energy she brought to any project she considered important enough to take personally. The defense against the dark arts position had been a revolving door for 20 years because of Voldemort's curse on it. With Voldemort gone and mortal and awaiting trial, the curse dissolved, and Lupin took the permanent post with the dignity of someone who had always known this was where he belonged, and had simply been waiting for the world to arrange itself correctly. The practical curriculum she redesigned from the ground up, working with Lupin as an equal partner, producing something that had both of their names on it and was better for it. She also drafted a proposal for a magical theory elective that would begin at 3rd year, not advanced theory, nothing optional, a core subject that taught magical students the actual foundations of what they were doing rather than assuming the foundations would be absorbed by osmosis. Flitwick read it and went very quiet and then said, "This is extraordinary," in the tone of someone looking at a thing they'd wanted to exist for 30 years. Harry read it too and said, "You're going to teach this yourself, aren't you?" Eventually, she said, "Not yet." "Why not yet?" She looked at him, and the look had something in it that had been developing since Godric's Hollow, less managed, more present, the expression of someone who has stopped editing themselves around a specific person. "Because I'm not done with other things first," she said. Harry waited. "I want to finish the year properly," she said. I want Newts, not because I need the qualification. I'm aware the qualification is somewhat redundant at this point, but because I started it and I finish things I start, and because after everything that's happened I want 6 months of actually being at school. She paused. Is that strange? No, Harry said. I want that too. She looked slightly relieved, which told him she'd been uncertain about saying it, and the uncertainty was one of the residual things, the habit of editing herself, of checking whether what she wanted was permitted, that the world had spent years building into her. He'd noticed it the way he noticed things about Hermione now, which was carefully and with attention, and he'd been deciding how to say something about it. Hermione, he said. Yes, you're allowed to want things. She looked at him. The look was direct and slightly complicated, and eventually soft in a way that Hermione's expression rarely was, the softness of a thing that has been held carefully for a long time being finally, provisionally set down. I know that, she said. I know you know it intellectually, Harry said. I mean, Harry. She said his name in the weight-bearing way, the way it carried more than 2 syllables. I know, a pause, thank you. They were in the library, which was where they always ended up when they were being honest about things, the library being the room in the castle that had always felt most like home to her, and by extension, over the years, to him. The afternoon light was low and gold through the tall windows. It was quiet. Okay, Harry said. Okay, she agreed. Neither of them moved for a moment, and then Hermione opened her essay on magical theory, curriculum, structure, and Harry leaned over to read it, and she didn't move the parchment away, which was its own kind of statement. The trial happened on a Tuesday. Tom Riddle was brought into the Wisengamot chamber on the 30th of November in ministry-issue robes, wandless, under restraint that was both magical and physical, and looked smaller than any version of him Harry had previously encountered. Not physically smaller, he was still tall, still carried himself with the residual bearing of a man who had once commanded absolute terror, but dimensionally smaller, the way a thing looks when you remove the myth from around it and find the person. Harry sat in the gallery. He'd been offered a seat on the floor as a witness, as a principal figure in the events under examination, and he'd declined. The trial wasn't his to run. It was Bones's, and she ran it with the clean, precise professionalism of someone who had been waiting years for this specific job. Hermione sat beside him, Ron on his other side, Luna in the row behind them with Neville, who had come because he understood specifically and personally why this trial mattered, and because the Wisengamot chamber was a room he'd been imagining in different ways since he was 10 years old. The charges took 45 minutes to read aloud. They were extensive. Tom Riddle sat through the reading of them with his hands folded in his lap and his expression entirely composed, which Harry found more truthful than any protestations of innocence or eruptions of defiance would have been. This was the authentic thing, the control, the stillness, the absolute refusal to give anything away. The control was the man. It had always been the man. When asked to enter a plea, Tom Riddle said, in a voice that had lost its supernatural quality but retained its precision, "Guilty." The chamber erupted. Not in celebration, the sound was more complicated than that, the sound of hundreds of people whose relationship with this moment was layered and personal and unresolved, receiving the word they'd needed and finding it was not quite the relief they'd expected. Relief that is complicated by the weight of what preceded it sounds like grief and triumph simultaneously, and that was what the chamber sounded like for approximately 30 seconds before Bones called order and the room settled. The sentencing was life imprisonment, Azkaban in the new post-Dementor configuration, which meant walls and wards and the removal of magical capability, not the sole destruction of Dementors. Harry had argued for this specifically and consistently, and he'd taken some grief for it from various corners, and he'd accepted the grief with equanimity because the position was right and he knew it was right, and being given grief for right positions was not new territory. When it was done, when the chamber had filed out and the officials had processed their paperwork, and Tom Riddle had been led away by auras who were professional and efficient and treated him exactly as they would treat any other prisoner, Harry sat in his gallery seat for a moment while the room emptied around him. Ron left him to it. Luna left him to it. Neville gripped his shoulder once briefly and said nothing, which was exactly right, and left. Hermione stayed. She sat beside him in the emptying chamber and let the silence be what it was, which was enormous and complicated and not entirely sad but not entirely anything else either. The chamber's high ceiling caught the echo of departing footsteps. The enchanted torches along the walls burned steadily. Outside in the ministry's corridors, Harry could hear the murmur of people talking, the sound of the world going on. "How are you?" Hermione asked. He considered the question properly because she'd asked it properly. "Tired," he said, "genuinely, deeply tired in a way I don't think I've been allowed to feel before because there was always something else." He looked at the empty chair where Tom Riddle had sat 20 minutes ago, and relieved, and he searched for it. It's strange to have something that has structured your entire life suddenly not be the structure anymore. "It'll take time to know what's underneath," she said. "Yes, that's not frightening though." "No," he agreed, "it's not." She looked at him. "You said you had thoughts about after," she said. "Weeks ago in the cottage, you never finished that." Harry looked at her. The chamber was almost empty now, a few clerks at the far end collecting documents, not paying attention. The torches burned, the ceiling was high and vaulted and old. I have several thoughts, he said. Several, she said, in order of. He paused, reconsidered. Actually, let me just say them in the order they actually matter. All right. First, Harry said, I want to take a trip, somewhere that has nothing to do with Britain or the Wizarding War or any of this, somewhere we've never been and nobody knows us. We, she said. You and me, he said, without any additional qualification, and held her gaze. She was quiet for a moment. The quiet wasn't uncertainty. He could read her well enough by now to know the difference between Hermione's uncertainty quiet and her processing quiet and her deciding not to edit herself quiet, and this was the third one. Where, she said. I was thinking somewhere with good libraries, Harry said, and a decent amount of history, and some outdoor space because you should probably be somewhere outdoors occasionally just for the contrast. That's a fairly broad set of criteria, she said. I thought you'd want to narrow it yourself. The expression on her face was not a smile exactly but was doing the work of one. Morocco, she said after a moment. There's a library in Marrakesh that maintains the largest collection of pre-medieval Arabic magical texts outside of the Cairo Institute, a beat, and the outdoor space is dramatic enough to justify the trip. Morocco, Harry agreed. You said first, she said, there were other things. The second thing, Harry said, is that I want to tell you that the word pair, the one you used to explain the recognition to Alderton, the one that Ron had complicated feelings about, I don't think it's only a description of our magical signatures. She looked at him directly. No calculation in it, no processing delay. She'd been ready for this, he understood, had been ready for it for some time, and had been waiting in the way Hermione waited for things she wanted to be certain of, for him to arrive at the same place with the same certainty. No, she said, it isn't. I should have said something before. We were somewhat preoccupied. Before the preoccupation, I mean before this year. He looked at her. I think I've known for a while. I was slow with it. You were processing other things, she said, in the generous way she had when she was being precise rather than just kind. She actually meant it. Actually thought the processing other things was a real explanation rather than an excuse, which was one of 1,000 things about her that he'd been turning over more consciously this week than ever before. I'm not processing other things now, Harry said. No, she agreed. Neither am I. He reached over and took her hand, the same way he'd taken it in the ritual chamber when she was trembling, and she held it the same way she'd held it then, not a response to distress, just a holding, complete and unqualified. They sat in the emptying Wisengamot chamber in the old building deep under London, with the torches burning and the clerks gathering their papers and the trial over and the world changed, and held on. Morocco was in February. They went for 10 days, which became 15 when Hermione found a scholar at the Marrakesh library named Fatima Ben Ali, who was working on a theory about pre-Islamic magical traditions and their intersection with the Peverell-era European magical frameworks. And their conversation lasted 3 days and produced 17 pages of notes, and a collaborative research proposal that Hermione wrote on a rooftop terrace while Harry drank mint tea and watched the city do its evening thing below them. You're going to go back, Harry said. We're going to go back, she corrected, making a note. Fatima wants to show you the manuscript she mentioned on day 1. She says the Peverell perceptual layer would let you read the underlying enchantment directly. The one from the 12th century, 11th actually, she recatalogued it. Hermione, the tea is getting cold. I'm finishing this paragraph. He waited. She finished the paragraph. She put the quill down and picked up her tea and looked at the city, the rooftops, the minarets, the darkening sky, the sound of the evening call to prayer drifting up from somewhere below, and the expression on her face was the rarest version of her expression, which was the one that wasn't doing any work at all, just receiving, just present. Happy? Harry asked. She considered it seriously. Yes, she said, distinctly yes. A pause. You? Yes, he said, and then, distinctly. She leaned against him. He put his arm around her. The city went on below them, the sounds of a very old place conducting its evening business, and the sky above Marrakesh was very large and very clear, the first stars beginning, and Harry looked at them with the Peverell clarity, and they were simply stars, ancient and far away and entirely themselves, burning in their own particular way, indifferent to prophecies and wars and inheritances. He found that he liked them very much. The months after the trial were less dramatic and more consequential than anyone in the wizarding world had fully prepared for. The legislation Hermione had drafted moved through the Wisengamot with the speed of something whose time has come. 3 of the 6 major reform proposals passed in full by March. 2 more passed in modified forms that she declared acceptable without enthusiasm but without objection. And 1, the most ambitious one, the proposal for a full restructuring of magical education policy to bring it in line with Muggle educational research, was sent back to committee 3 times before she withdrew it, rewrote it from the ground up, and resubmitted it in a form that the committee apparently found difficult to argue with on any specific point, and which passed in April. Harry watched this process with the particular admiration of someone who understood exactly how much precision and stubbornness it required, and who was glad not to be doing it himself. He was doing other things. The Aura Division, under Bones, was being rebuilt from its post-war structure into something more organized and considerably better trained. Harry's involvement was voluntary and unofficial. He had no title, held no position, was not on any payroll, and it was therefore extremely influential because the combination of what he was and the informality of his involvement meant that he could say things that officials with titles and positions couldn't say, and people listened with the particular attention they give to someone who has nothing to lose by being direct. He ran practical training sessions twice a week. Not drills, situations, live and complex, and designed to produce the kind of adaptive, real-time thinking that the old training regime had never prioritized. The auras who came to those sessions left them substantially better than they arrived. This was not modest, it was simply true. Ron joined the division formally in March, which surprised approximately nobody who knew him. He turned out to be an exceptionally good aura in the specific way of someone whose instinct for the human element of any situation was finely calibrated. He understood people, what motivated them, what scared them, what they were hiding, in the deep intuitive way that can't be taught, and is worth more in the field than most technical skills. Bones told Harry privately that Ron Weasley had already exceeded the projections of 3 of his assessors, and that she expected him to have his own team within 2 years. Harry passed this on to Ron, who said shut up with an enormous grin, and immediately told Hermione, who said, I know, I read Bones's assessment, in a tone that suggested she'd read it approximately 30 seconds after it was written. Luna went home to her father and the Quibbler, and somewhere in the early spring published a piece about sympathetic magical integration that was accurate in every detail, and which approximately 12 people read and understood, and which those 12 people found transformative. She sent Harry and Hermione a copy with a note that said, I dedicated it to the 2 of you. Also, the piece about blibbering humdingers on page 14 is worth your time. The piece about blibbering humdingers was completely incomprehensible, but it was written with the particular quality of joyful certainty that Luna brought to everything she believed, and Harry read it twice. Draco Malfoy returned to Hogwarts after the Ministry cleared the Malfoy name. The process was long and complicated, and Narcissa's cooperation with the eventual war crimes investigation helped considerably. His return was quiet and not entirely comfortable, and he didn't speak to Harry directly for 3 weeks, and then he did, and the conversation was short and consisted mostly of Malfoy saying, I know what I owe you, in the tone of someone reading from a script they'd prepared and rehearsed. You don't owe me anything, Harry said. Malfoy looked at him with the expression of someone who had expected this response and didn't believe it. The message to Andromeda. My mother, I did that because it was right to do it, Harry said, not to put you in debt to me. He paused. If you want to do something with what you've been given, do it, but don't do it because you think you owe me. That's the wrong foundation. Malfoy was quiet for a moment, the complicated mathematics of his face working through something. Right, he said eventually, in the tone of someone tucking information away for careful later examination. He went on to have a moderately distinguished 7th year, transferred to a European magical law program in Vienna after graduation, and was eventually involved in drafting the Wizard-Muggle Boundary Reform Act of 2003, which was the most significant piece of magical legislation in 40 years, and which Hermione, reading it, called actually quite good structurally, better than I expected. Harry, reading her, read it, thought, fair, the Elder Wand. Harry had been carrying it since the cottage and had not used it since, not once, which was a decision he'd made in the doorway of the ruined cottage while waiting for Dumbledore, and which he'd held without second thoughts. He knew what it was. He understood its allegiance. He also understood that keeping it, maintaining the cycle of the world's most powerful weapon passing from master to master through conquest, generation through generation, was an invitation to a repetition of everything that had just ended. A more powerful weapon doesn't produce a more peaceful world, it produces a more dangerous one. He went to Dumbledore's office on a Wednesday morning in late April, when the school was quiet and the grounds were beginning to show the first green of spring, and he put the Elder Wand on the desk. I want it buried with you, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the wand and then at Harry with an expression that had, over the preceding months, arrived at something different from what it had been for most of Harry's time at Hogwarts, less strategic, less careful, more genuinely present, more human. With me, Dumbledore said, when the time comes, with you at Hogwarts, where Grindelwald's people couldn't find it and where Voldemort found it only by the most extreme measures. He looked at the wand on the desk. The cycle breaks here. The wand's power has always come from the fact that there's someone who wants it badly enough to kill for it. If we make that impossible, we break the power, Dumbledore said. We break the need for it, Harry said, which was slightly different. Nobody should need a weapon like this. If the situation ever arises where someone does, then we've already failed long before the wand matters. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. Outside the office window, the spring morning was all birdsong and green light and the sound of students beginning to fill the grounds, the particular sound of a school in late spring when the worst of the year is behind and the exams are close and everything feels temporary in the good way. You are not what I expected you to be, Dumbledore said, and it was entirely a compliment said in the voice of someone who means it completely. I expected courage, I expected goodness, I had not anticipated wisdom. I had help, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, you did, and you were wise enough to accept it. He picked up the Elder Wand and opened the drawer of his desk and placed it inside and closed the drawer, and it was done. Newts happened in June. Hermione sat all 12 of hers, which was 2 more than the maximum recommended number and 4 more than the required minimum, and Harry sat 9, and they both sat them with the knowledge that the results wouldn't define them in any conventional sense and that this was not actually the point. The point was exactly what Hermione had said in the Wisengamot chamber, finishing something properly, being present for the last chapter of the thing they'd started together at 11 years old. The defense examination was practical, administered by Lupin, and was the simplest thing either of them had done all year. The written paper was thorough. Harry finished it 20 minutes early and spent the remaining time reading back through his answers with the Peverell clarity engaged, not checking for errors but simply reading, curious whether the way he thought had changed on paper the way it had changed in practice. It had. The answers were differently structured than they'd been a year ago, less reactive, more architectural, building from foundations rather than reaching for conclusions. He thought Lupin would appreciate it. Results came back in late July, outstanding across every subject, both of them. The examining board attached a note to Harry's results that said, in formally careful ministry language, that several of his defense answers had been flagged for inclusion in the examiner's training material as exemplary demonstrations of applied magical theory. Harry read the note, told Hermione, and watched the expression on her face navigate through approximately 4 stages before settling on a smile that was entirely and unambiguously delighted. Training material, she said, apparently. For the examiners, that's what it says. She looked at him with an expression that contained everything, the 6 years and the war and the library at 5 in the morning and the ritual chamber and the cottage in Morocco and all of it, and she laughed. Genuinely laughed, the full version, the one she kept for things that were actually funny, and the sound of it in the quiet of their kitchen in the small house they'd taken in Hogsmeade for the summer was the best sound Harry had heard in a year full of significant sounds. He laughed too. They laughed together in the kitchen on a July morning with the window open and the summer outside doing its best, and then Hermione made tea with the precise, economical movements of someone who has made tea in this kitchen enough times that it stopped being a process and become simply something that happens, and they took their mugs to the back garden and sat in the morning sun. The world was going on. It was doing what worlds do, changing slowly, changing imperfectly, moving in the direction of better more or less because people who cared kept pushing it, and people who didn't kept being out-organized by the people who did. It wasn't clean and it wasn't finished, and it never would be because that wasn't how worlds worked, and both of them knew that and neither of them needed it to be. The Peverell legacy sat quietly in both of them, as it had since October, not a weight anymore, not a revelation, just the shape of who they were. The knowledge, the clarity, the deep and ancient understanding of old magic and what it meant. They used it the way they used everything they'd learned, not for its own sake, not as a performance, but in service of whatever needed doing as part of the tool set they'd been building their whole lives. "What are we doing next year?" Harry asked. Hermione was looking at the garden where something was growing that she'd planted in April and that Harry had been unable to identify but which was doing very well. "Fatima invited us back to Marrakesh in September," she said. "I thought we might stay longer this time, 3 months, maybe 4. Her manuscript project is genuinely significant and she needs a second researcher." 3 months in Morocco, Harry said. "You liked it." "I did like it. And from there I want to go to Cairo. The Institute has archives that nobody's cross-referenced against the Peverell texts, and I think there's something in the overlap that hasn't been found yet." She paused. "And then I'd like to come back here eventually and figure out the teaching thing. The curriculum proposal is passing and Lupin's been asking about co-developing the advanced curriculum." "Co-developing with you," Harry said. "With us," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him, direct and clear and entirely present, the same way she'd looked at him across the Wisengamot chamber on the day the trial ended, the same way she'd looked at him in the cottage doorway when the night came in, the same way she'd looked at him from across 100 library tables and examination rooms and dangerous situations and ordinary Tuesday mornings for 6 years. "Us," Harry said. "Yes," Hermione said. "Obviously, unless you have different plans you haven't mentioned." "No different plans," Harry said. "Same plans, yours and mine." She handed him the toast she'd brought from the kitchen without telling him she was bringing it, because she'd known he'd want it, because she knew him completely in the way of 2 people whose magical signatures are so fluent with each other they function as a single source. She went back to looking at the garden. He ate the toast and looked at the summer morning and the world, which was imperfect and difficult and enormous and alive, and felt the Peverell clarity reading it all with the calm, unflinching legibility it gave to everything. Old magic, the deepest kind, not the power that ended wars, though it had done that. Not the knowledge that changed legislation, though it had done that too. But the quiet daily fact of 2 people facing the world together, pair in the oldest sense of the word, something recognized, something ancient, something that had always known where it was going. The summer went on around them. A bird sang somewhere in the garden. Hermione made a note on a piece of parchment about something she was working on and tucked it into her book. Harry finished his tea. Everything else could wait 5 minutes.